Hey everybody, Nerd Slayer. This is 6 Pixels Under, my weekly podcast, and I want to obviously welcome you guys for being here today with me. There's a lot to talk about this week, of course. There always is in the world of gaming. Biggest things that jump out to me are probably the Path of Exile expansion, Final Fantasy 14 expansion. There's also been a Command and Conquer remaster announced, which has people kind of feeling mixed feelings, I guess. THQ Nordic, wanted to talk a bit about them as well. Thanks for the bit donation, by the way, Cups and Lantern. I appreciate that, 400 bits, and 200 from Goosey B. Thanks, guys. What else did I want? Oh, some journalist PvP. We were gonna watch them debate. There's apparently a debate between Yong Yea, Yong Yea. Is it Yong Yea? I'm not sure how you pronounce that. But and then it's Jason Schreier, I believe is how you pronounce it. Another prominent journalist. I believe he doesn't work for. Is it Kotaku or is it Forbes? I can't remember off the top of my head, but we'll see in a second. But anyway, prominent writer and apparently defender of Fallout 76. Of course, there's more to talk about with Fallout 76, of course. There's always more to talk about with that story. And also there's more apparently in the story in regards to Telltale closing as well. There's some more stuff there. Oh, thanks Cups and Lantern for letting me know. Yeah, I wanted to watch a little bit of a review video, RPG to file. The samurai versus the kappa. Rider is a better term for him. Yeah, sorry. I don't know much about him, but we'll soon know about him more. So let me go ahead and bring up my title screen. Current gaming news. Of course, as you guys remember, this podcast also features you guys as a guest. Whenever I don't have a guest on the show, as you see, there's nobody here with me today. It's just me. You guys are my guests. So if you ever have any questions you want to ask, make sure to @ me in chat or @ Card in chat. Card is the acting moderator today for today's chat. So just join our Discord. If you want to ask a question on stream, then you can go to the podcast lobby and just wait there in the waiting room with Card. He'll let you come in whenever, or he'll let me know whenever we have somebody who wants to ask anything. Remember, you don't just have to ask questions at the very end. If you have anything that you want to respond to that maybe I've talked about, maybe there's a topic that I just mentioned and you want to respond about that immediately, you can join in and we can talk about it. Of course, this is always like a way, I see the podcast as a way to engage with people more, but also engage with more current events, because I don't really get to talk about current events much, especially being kind of a retro channel. Another update, I need to change the text on screen. 2 of our subs have dropped. We're now at 25 out of 50. So we're halfway to 50 right now. 25 out of 50 for those who don't know, and most of you guys are probably already subbed, but for those who haven't watched, either you're a YouTube fan and you're watching this on YouTube or you're watching this on SoundCloud. On our Twitch, we have a current sub goal right now of 50, which is not a lot at all. This is just one that I wanted to get the ball rolling, starting more sub goals. And that goal is me wearing my noir or detective outfit, permanently on the stream. Either after that means if I drop below 50 and you guys just say screw it after that, it'll still work. But we're hoping to create more and more sub goals, because as I get more subs and more viewers on Twitch, it'll allow me to finally apply rather for a partnership, because I'm only currently an affiliate on Twitch, which means that people can't really change the settings of my streams, and it also means that I can't play ads, and I only get 1 emote, which we don't even have that yet. We're working on that soon. I would look towards next month, but we're obviously looking to do more of those. So anyway, 25 out of 50, we're halfway there. 25 is not that hard to do. I think our community could do 25 more, but too much of our audience is on YouTube. They don't yet know that we come on Twitch. And as I've already told Limpos, there's a lot of changes, like I don't want to say changes, but improvements coming to the channel. And one for sure is that we're going to get back to streaming more Mafia, because I know people love watching that. Anyway, let's actually jump into the news this week. I wanted to talk briefly about. Let me pull this up on screen. I wanted to talk briefly about the Path of Exile Betrayal expansion. Now, as you guys who regularly watch the show know, I don't play Path of Exile and have never played Path of Exile. And I've had my personal reasons for not doing such. But I'll have to say, after watching, you know, the unveiling of this expansion, I feel like if there's ever a time I'm going to play the game, it's probably going to be now. Yeah, especially after watching the amount of polish that they put into these expansions that they put out. Like, really, their content cycle is far more intense than MMOs, because it's basically like the only way to play the game is to like progress PvE, progress with new weapons. So they have to constantly create new dungeons and new instances and new bosses and stuff. But they're doing a really good job. I mean, PoE is like a really good tale of success. It's a good tale of a good business model that apparently makes them enough money for them to keep functioning in the way that they can. It's a fair business model. Obviously, Path of Exile is a free-to-play game. I've always been willing to shower Path of Exile with praise, and always been willing to refer people to such a game whenever they're asking for a good free-to-play game or a good example of free-to-play and that sort of stuff, because I really do think it is probably the best in those certain regards. It's got a decent feedback, a gameplay feedback loop, which is fun and exciting enough, especially for a free-to-play game. You don't need to pay, but paying for things is more so convenience. And I mean, when you start to play good games that are free, you feel like you're incentivized to want to pay, because at that point it's like, I would have paid money for this game regardless, right? So why not just throw a couple of bucks into there? Obviously, that's a big reason why free-to-play games are so successful. But anyway, this particular expansion looks very interesting, and I think it's a good time maybe for me to get involved. So I've been thinking about maybe doing some streaming of me just essentially starting from scratch with Path of Exile. Just so you guys know ahead of time, my biggest issues with this game are my same issues that I had with Diablo 3, and to a minor extent, Diablo 2. And that's that I dislike how the game... Actually, I take Diablo 2 out of there. Diablo 3. I dislike how the game, when you roam around, doesn't have any real, like, PvP, right? I come from playing Diablo 1, Diablo 2. Recently, I started playing that, funny enough, posthumously almost. And I even did a stream on it recently. And then, of course, the game that I talk about ad nauseum with you guys, which is a very obscure Japanese kind of Diablo 2 clone, was Dark Eden. But Dark Eden actually was a massive multiplayer online game. So it's kind of interesting that this is kind of come full circle in a way, that Path of Exile is essentially doing what Diablo 2 or what this Dark Eden game were doing, you know, 10, 20 years ago, but obviously it's doing it in a new, fresh way and in an exciting enough way. So the no PvP content in the game, and PvP being so like I don't want to say auxiliary, but almost just like on the outskirts of being like a big focus of the game, has always been an issue for me personally. But the other issue, funny enough, is actually simpler. It's that I dislike the recent trend of these ARPG type titles and even just action games to be overly spammy with either movement abilities or AoE abilities. So like the combat essentially is just you running around just like spamming like this giant massive AoE. For me personally, that just gets old after a while, because it's just like it doesn't feel as satisfying for me like when you play Diablo 1 or Diablo 2 and you kill a monster. Those games, even if you're just attacking them with like white damage, like you're just auto attacking them, it feels way more enjoyable. So it's something that I would have to get used to, I think, with Path of Exile. Same thing with like Black Desert Online. If I ever wanted to get into that game, I'd have to get used to that kind of style. You know, the more mashy style with like a billion different teleportation and movement speed abilities. That's kind of one of my issues with those games, is like everyone has a teleport, everyone has some sort of like dash, everyone has the ability to move around. So then therefore it just literally becomes the game is just, you know, jumping around doing these dashes endlessly. And like Black Desert Online, in my opinion, is probably one of the worst in that regard, where you'll literally watch people who are PvPing each other just like and it's like when you're watching Dragon Ball Z, except there's no actually fighting going on. They're just literally just like teleporting all over the place. Sorry, I was reading a message that was sent to me. White damage, yeah, okay. Iframe spam. Yeah, Guild Wars 2 has that problem to a certain extent as well. Invuln frames are certainly problematic. I wish I mentioned them in my combat video. You guys talking about Pillars of Eternity. Good one. That's a good one. What else were we going to talk about? I guess if we're going to talk about interesting things first, let's talk about this recent announcement from EA, according to the Command and Conquer post, or Command and Conquer subreddit, rather. There was a post 5 days ago by an EA producer. And this post has like 3,000, 4,000 different upvotes or whatever else. So this is an official post, and it's a pretty long post. I don't think I'm going to sit here and read this whole thing just so you guys can see on screen. It's pretty damn long, but apparently they're announcing that there is a remastering of the C&C franchise. I don't know how many of the franchise, like what games exactly. What does it say right here? Okay, so it says the original Red Alert, and then the, okay, so they're also going to do the expansions, apparently. C&C and Red Alert. Okay. But apparently they're going to team up with Petroglyph Games to develop this, and that's kind of what's got people, I think, not as suspicious of this, maybe. Apparently they're also even getting original talent. It says right here. They've got even original talent working on the game, so that's certainly good in certain ways. But it's just hard to feel at this point with a company like EA. It's so hard to ever feel excited whenever they want to reboot a company or reboot a franchise or reboot whatever. It's just like you always know that there's some sort of catch, obviously. Such a corporation doesn't just change its way of behaving overnight, and certainly wouldn't when it's been, widely successful. They've gotten a little bit of pushback lately with the whole Belgium and loot box stuff, but generally speaking, EA is a company that has many retired games and franchises that they could potentially reboot, and I feel like they're one of those companies that probably can't get away with it as much as others can, particularly because they leave such a bad taste in people's mouth with the game that they want to remaster. Obviously, Command and Conquer is a story, in terms of its development story, has been told multiple times. Gamers, it's GVMERs on MERS, rather. I don't know why I pronounced the rest of it and then sounded it out, but they did a documentary on it, or a little long-form essay on it, or littler long-form essay, so maybe not quite doc length, but anyway, multiple content creators have made videos about Command and Conquer. I know people have asked me to make one as well. It's got a lot of really interesting stories, and actually it's one in particular I'm not as adept at compared to, obviously some of the titles that I've covered. But, seeing some of the top comments on this page, like you saw stuff like this guy's talking about being skeptical, now he's hopeful now. So far, it seems like they ticked every box for me. It's so hard because he's like, rationally, I can understand what he's saying in terms of like ticked boxes, because you're going to be like, are they working with original developers? Tick. Are they getting, are they working like within the original framework? Tick. Maybe even like an old sound guy or an old music person. Like when you see all of that sort of stuff get mentioned, and you actually can have the original company to some extent actually lead the development on that, it certainly can make you feel like maybe things are going to go right. But for me personally with EA, I just don't think that I could say that it would erase all of my preconceived notions about the company. Preconceived notions that are obviously founded in reality, from repeated abuse from a company such as EA, their overuse and over heavy and strong focus on microtransactions, unfair microtransactions, all of that sort of stuff. They say that they're not going to charge microtransactions with this remastered collection. So this could just literally be a situation where they just want to make some quick cash off of a good, or maybe even just a decent remaster. Or maybe they really want to take it seriously, like the recent Spyro remaster that has been circulating that's done decently. The Crash Bandicoot remasters. Those have certainly had a little bit more detail put into them than the typical remaster. So I don't know where C&C is going to end up on that like spectrum. It's hard to know what games are going to end up on that spectrum as well. I mean, when you look at like Silent Hill or like Resident Evil is a good example of a remaster, which is certainly, you're talking about like closer to remake territory. Or, I mean, shit, can we still talk about the Final Fantasy VII remake that has been in, you know, I think at this point it's considered a remake because it's a completely new engine. So there's a spectrum when it comes to remasters. Some are called remasters, but are actually more so remakes. So it'll be interesting to see where this one falls on that. But looking at the recent trend with Warcraft 3, obviously the titles that I just mentioned earlier, it certainly seems like these big publishers are realizing with these remasters that they can essentially take an old, maybe dead franchise and kind of breathe a little bit more life back into it, cash in on some nostalgia, cash in on, you know, some people capitalizing on, well, essentially these companies capitalize on the fact that this is a known commodity that could potentially attract people who didn't know of the commodity, right? So maybe like a newer age, like the millennial age. Maybe it can attract a newer audience who wasn't there to play C&C when they were younger or whatever else. And that's why I can never really fault rather. I can never really fault these companies with these remasters, because I personally don't find anything wrong with a remaster. I know some people see it as like, you're just cashing in on this and that, and you're taking advantage of people's nostalgia. I get it to some extent, but I like it because it's like the idea of that somebody could come to me and say, hey, we could remaster EverQuest 1, for example, or remaster Star Wars Galaxies. Those are cool ideas to me, because even though I'm maybe not necessarily convinced that they're successful or would be successful, we haven't really seen an MMO ever have some sort of remaster. I would certainly be interested in it, and if it could work, it'd be awesome, because then you could show a whole new age of fans who never had the chance to play the previous games because of whatever technical requirements. The game's obviously maybe, you know, literally dead in terms of its official server capacity, or whatever else. So that's why I've always been on the more lenient side when it comes to like remasters or reboots or whatever else. As long as they don't change the fundamentals of a game, like, you know, obviously that's the whole keep vanilla thing. As long as they don't change the inner workings of a game. Like, for example, imagine if you're playing a Jedi Academy remaster, except it's not a physics-based engine. You're going to be like, what? How could you change such a fundamental aspect of this game? Or if you're playing a KOTOR 2 or a KOTOR 1 remaster, and they got worse voice actors, or they changed the plot, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, those sorts of things are going to certainly set people off. So I think from a game developer perspective and a publisher perspective, remaster titles are very sexy, because they get to put essentially less work than they would have to put on an original title, but they could actually potentially outsell an original title that costs far more money to not only develop, or sorry, takes time to develop, but also costs far more money, or far more funds in order to afford. So remasters are, it's like a weird mixture of like, there's win-win across the board, except if they're done poorly. When a remaster is rushed, like the Silent Hill one that I mentioned, or when it's just a complete utter joke and adds essentially next to nothing new or different, and it's kind of even just like a shitty HD remake, which we've seen with a couple remasters, those are cash grabs, and those should certainly be called such, and we should definitely be harsh on those games. But yeah, I wouldn't be so quick to just dismiss all remasters. Remasters could make a quick buck, reigniting interest in the IP. to bring them to mobile. That's a good one, Trend Killer. That's a good one. Okay. Did someone just make fun of me because I still use a Yahoo email? Yes, I do. You caught me. Let's go ahead and move on. I wanted to talk a little bit about another company that I find to be particularly interesting, and that's THQ Nordic. So for those who aren't aware of this company, THQ, as in the original THQ, doesn't actually exist anymore. THQ Nordic, which is actually like a separate entity at this point, still does exist. And apparently it's been a company who's been quietly snatching up titles and trying to sort of relaunch maybe failed games or relaunch maybe games that didn't necessarily see the light of day. And I found them kind of interesting because they're almost just like a serial entrepreneur, or they're just somebody who just looks at that. They're like a used car salesman. They see what kind of cars you have on the lot, and they're like, look, I'll give you this amount of money for all of those cars. And then they hope to go and then turn those cars enough to a profit, which apparently has been happening. Their net sales, as the article shows on the screen, is up 1,400%, which is apparently, accounts to 139.5 million, which is, quite a serious amount of money. Again, the most interesting thing about THQ Nordic is that they've been buying out a lot of these old school, basically shut down companies. For example, they've purchased a couple IPs recently, and I was gonna say, is this really the same Lars that I've been recently researching? But this guy's Lars Wingefors. I'm assuming Lars is probably a little bit more common of a name in such a region as a Nordic region. Anyway, the recent acquisitions that they got were Alone in the Dark, Kingdoms of Amalur, as it says here, Time Splitters. I think there's even more.
Hey, thanks.
Goat Simulator. Apparently they acquired the guy who created Goat Simulator. Oh, This Is the Police. That's right. Titan Quest, Red Faction. They've done that one as well. They've even done big releases, apparently, from Codemasters. Kind of all over the place. Just really interesting to see a company find such an interesting way to be successful. And we don't have any reason so far to, I guess, have any negative feelings towards this. They haven't done anything bad. They haven't ever launched a game that was just like completely rife with microtransactions or anything. In a lot of ways, I think people are seeing THQ Nordic as if, or almost as if some rich, passionate nerd is just deciding to say, you know what? It's such a shame some of these games never got to see the time of day again, or these IPs are dead. Let's go ahead and use these already existing IPs, and even in some cases existing games, and just maybe even release these as, or re-release these as remasters, or maybe in the case of Alone in the Dark and Time Splitters, possibly create a new game given that IP already. It's a well-known IP, or at least it's well-known enough that core gamers would recognize it, so they already have that as a boost in sales. Not to mention it'll be a big PR stunt, which is, again, essentially what they've been doing with these big announcements. These are big PR stunts that are getting them even more success because of their perceived value, I guess you would say, to some extent, because stock is weird like that, right? They say, oh, it says right here, they have 55 games in development. 35 are unannounced. Now, obviously, many of those are probably re-releases, as somebody also pointed out in the comments, I believe. Some of these are re-releases, rather. But still, that's a lot of games in development. And it kind of makes me think that maybe they just sort of get a bunch of IPs, throw a dart, and just see which one they think they're most motivated or interested in creating a game in such an IP, or with such an IP, rather. But I don't think we've seen many other companies do such a thing. We've seen companies do what I call, I guess, westernifying titles like MMOs. We've seen Area Games used to do that. Game Ago does it in America. Nexon is probably still around. They still do it to some extent. But what these companies will do is they'll like take Asian games and they'll give them American releases, or they'll take old school games and like give them kind of like re-releases under a different name, but it's basically like the same game. Obviously, those probably have a lot more negative connotation than this would be, and you're probably never going to see someone acquire an old school MMO IP or whatever else, because it's like, how many IPs in the MMO space are so valuable that you would want to buy them, for their IP itself? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, when someone buys APB, they're buying it for the technology, for the platform, for the hope that they can port it to Unreal Engine 4, like Little Orbit when they purchased it. They're not buying it because of the APB brand. It's not a particularly big brand, and certainly not as big as like GTA. And could you guys hear that? That was like a really, really loud motorcycle. Somebody was having a good time. Anyway, I just wanted to talk a little bit about THQ Nordic. I think they're a very interesting case, and maybe at some point I'd like to do a video about them. Hey, thanks for subscribing, RC Win. I appreciate it. We're back up to 26, boys. Let me change that on screen. Appreciated. Oh, that reminds me. On my title, you notice that I mentioned Fallout 76 LOL. Now, of course, we've been covering Fallout 76 already at this point, and we've talked about it multiple times now. But Jim Sterling has recently made a video about it, and obviously in his normal fashion proceeds to list the innumerable amounts of reasons why it's a terrible experience and is a terrible thing. And I mean, look at all of these other videos too at this point. Fallout 76 is a lie. This one has 2 million views. I didn't think that all of this information, all of this hoopla, if you will, I didn't think that this would really have that big of an impact. I think a lot of us felt the same way in certain regards to Battlefront 2. Hearing all of this backlash about Fallout 76 and being a big proponent of that, obviously trying to push that as much as I can on the podcast, I didn't really think that it would really affect anything large scale, right? Just because gamers are so habitual in a lot of ways. They'll purchase a game just because it is Fallout. They'll purchase a game just because there's nothing else on the market, right? But in this particular case, I think we're starting to see some facts that coming out that are actually proving that our backlash, or the backlash rather, that we've created and directed towards Bethesda, it's doing something. It's doing something. There's recently been an article and some news about how the game's been performing with pre-orders, or how it performed rather with pre-orders in the UK. Apparently they were saying that it was like half of what they were expecting it to be. And I've heard obviously even worse cases. I've heard that it's selling worse than Fallout 4. Of course, it's selling worse than Fallout 4. We all expected that. But other things that have been pointed out, for example, little interesting things that don't necessarily mean they're maybe not causal, but there could be a correlation, and that's Twitch numbers. Although Fallout 76 is a title essentially created for a Twitch audience, right? It has no NPCs. It's a game that's designed for having interaction with other people around you and even audience interaction. It's a game that theoretically would look great being streamed. It's actually getting worse streaming numbers than Fallout 4 was getting at launch. And so people are thinking that's indicative of something as well. Also, of course, the sales things that I've mentioned already. Bethesda is promising a bunch of big patches and surely understands their issues, but just blatantly don't respond to other issues, which of course we kind of expect that at this point. But let me just say this. I know we've been talking an awful lot about Fallout 76, but it's just really interesting to see, finally, we're starting to see more very apparent backlash towards things. And it's certainly good, largely, I think I would say, just for the simple fact that us, the people with the dollars, the consumers, we can affect the market, even though sometimes it feels like I'm just one person. why is me not buying this game going to mean anything? Well, if we all band together and say, hey, we don't support this bad business practice, we don't support this game, then we have a little bit more of a case, right? When we have multiple people doing it. So it's been good to see that to some extent. One thing I will say that people have to be careful about is sometimes it becomes just fun to hate certain titles. We saw this with Mass Effect Andromeda, big time. It just becomes in vogue to hate on these certain games. And first off, if you have actual credible reasons to be critical about something, then you should be critical of it, right? You shouldn't just like pretend that it's great and just ignore reality, right? But it comes to a certain point where it's almost like becomes a fetish. People just love to all kick the proverbial like horse, right? Even though they know, yeah, Mass Effect Andromeda is such a bad game, but why does everybody always want to talk about it being such a bad game? And because it's like a bonding moment, right? It's become a general thing now. Even general fans know about Mass Effect Andromeda and how terrible it was. But it was also because of a lot of like the reactionary videos about it, right? They showed all of these terrible voice things and horrible animations and lifeless characters and this sort of thing. So YouTubers and streamers definitely gave Mass Effect Andromeda a really bad view. But other people have played the game and have said things like, while it's certainly not a good game, it's not the worst game ever, which is kind of like one of the connotations that a game like that has. I feel the kind of same with Fallout 76 to some extent. I think that it's definitely going to get beat up really bad right now, and people are going to expect a certain level of quality. Again, it deserves every bit of criticism that it's going to get. But I just urge caution. Like, it's so easy to jump on a bandwagon to hate something without actually knowing why you're hating this thing, right? Like when you hear someone just say like, oh, we all know Fallout 76 is terrible, I still want to ask that person, okay, why do you think it's terrible? Because even though I think I know why it's terrible, that's my opinion, right? And there's obviously the documented facts that are terrible, the bugs, the engine tied to the frame rate, etc., etc. But we might actually disagree on why the game's bad, right? But it's so easy to jump on a bandwagon of hate and just be like, oh, it's so easy to hate this thing, so I'm just going to hate it without actually knowing. I urge caution with that, because it's like there's a lot of titles that get, for example, really bad reps and have really negative preconceived notions about them that might not even necessarily be true. And this is a little bit of my nostalgia speaking here, but a perfect example of this is actually Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. To me, is a perfect example of this. When you look back at Majora's Mask, like in a posthumous sort of, like in a retrospective sort of state, you think to yourself, like, this was a very bold and cool idea. Like, maybe it didn't work the best in certain ways, and it certainly had its like problems. But many YouTubers and critics and even people I've spoken to personally realize when you look back, you're kind of like, Majora's Mask was actually it was a pretty good game, right? But at the time when Majora's Mask was coming out, people were giving it so much crap because of its 3-day, a cycle essentially, where you had to either slow down or speed up time or go back in time, and that was kind of how the game worked. But it's kind of one of those things where if you just blindly hate it because it's like fun to hate it, or it's like the general opinion to hate it, you won't actually realize that it's not a bad game, right? It just has a very controversial mechanic, right? I could say the same thing as like early Dark Souls. We could say the same thing as about like Ultima Online, like PvP centric games. Sometimes really hardcore raiding games have this. Sometimes they get these really negative stigmas because of their more extreme audience, and it makes it to where other people aren't willing to try such a game, or will unfairly characterize the game, I guess I would say. To talk a little bit more about Fallout 76, or at least things that are related to Fallout 76, I found so there was something that was really interesting that developed this week. We talked, I think, a bit about it on the podcast. For some reason, I didn't put it here in my notes, so I'm going to have to pull it up. So let me do that really quickly. But it was regarding Jason Schreier, I believe is how you pronounce his name. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it right, or wrong, rather. Terrible at pronouncing names. I wouldn't take it personally. And Yong Yea. So This all comes from or stems from, there was a video actually it was an article that Jason Schreier wrote. Let me pull up that article now. It was a Fallout article. Okay, here we go. So this was a pretty big criticism. I'm trying to remember, is this the one where he was criticizing the other content creator in this video? Or if it was just in a tweet. Anyway, so for those who can't see on screen, Kotaku, aka Jason Schreier, writer, wrote, "The controversy over Bethesda's game engine is misguided." And this is basically, let's start from the beginning. This is, as far as I can tell, the earliest state of the event. Could someone in the chat find me the tweet, the series of tweets between the two? Could one of you find that for me? I know there's plenty of sharp detectives who can type it in Google, but I want to kind of build the premise here. Now, some people might ask, why am I even talking about this? That's because I think there's been a lot of interesting points raised in this discussion between these two people. Obviously, there's a lot of calls of what is ethical, what is considered good criticism. There's also been, people have dubbed Jason to not be a gamer and to merely be a journalist, right? So we've got a little bit of gamer elitism to some extent. It's also a little bit of YouTuber drama / PvP amongst journalists / YouTube, content creators, which is also a little bit interesting. But I wanted to dive a little bit more into, I think, the exchange between the two, because I think it's interesting. Either of them, at least from what I've seen, they've made good points, but they also, I think, fundamentally misunderstand certain things. So let's just start from the beginning. The Kotaku article in question, as I show on screen, controversy over Bethesda's game engine is misguided. And now, Phil, I'm going to post this in chat just so you can read this if you want to. But I've already obviously skimmed through this before. Multiple people obviously have been criticizing Fallout 76 specifically because of its engine. It obviously uses the, it's like a hybrid creation engine at this point, especially with the recent code that they've started putting into it. Obviously, the reception to it hasn't been good, and it rightfully so hasn't been good. The engine, in particular, I think the biggest problems people have mentioned with it are probably, obviously, performance. They don't think Fallout 76 looks particularly good. Many people have said that it looks downright ugly in certain cases. Other people have criticized that it's tied to a frame rate, which essentially creates a whole, slew of issues in regards to having different frame rates, server issues, server and client issues. And then I think, obviously, the biggest issues that are brought up typically with the creation engine are, of course, the way NPCs function, which I guess doesn't matter in this case. It doesn't probably matter in this case. But also combat feels a little bit janky. Of course, it's very, very easy to also bring up how terrible the VAT system is in Fallout 76, right? Lots of legitimate issues with the engine. I think somebody in chat actually mentioned something else earlier. I didn't know if it was one of you guys, but somebody said something along the lines of the engine, although it has obviously gone, the creation engine, I think it's funny for us to meme that it hasn't changed at all, right? It's funny for us to kind of meme about that. Sorry, that was my more one game, but I mean, obviously it's changed, right? We can look at Oblivion. I mean, well, first off, Gamebryo has changed drastically since its inception in like 98 or whatever it is, like 95 technically, if you consider Net Immerse or whatever, the original Gamebryo. It's been around for quite a while. It's obviously gone through a number of changes. the issue that people have with the creation engine isn't that they don't think that they're trying to fix the engine. It's that they think that it's not a worthy endeavor. And this is like a fundamental misunderstanding of kind of both sides. They don't actually understand that a majority of audience criticism is simplistic, because from their perspective, it's just, what is the thing that affects me the most? That's the way the game plays, right? That's the engine. So they don't care if, Bethesda promises in 3 billion more years or 1 more year or 5 more days that they'll fix the creation engine. Like, they don't care about that because it's not a realistic goal. You can't just fix the engine, right? Like, it obviously has some underlying issues with it, and they've struggled to even make it work in a multiplayer fashion. So, like, there's a lot of legitimate criticism for the engine. But I definitely think that this has been interesting to watch kind of unfold, because there are interesting points raised here, like I said, on both sides. Obviously, the article continues to go on and basically belabor the point to some extent. But it essentially says, in particular, it points out Yong Yea, Yong Yea. I guess I'll call him Yong Yea, I think is how he pronounces it. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. But it says, Bethesda will keep the same fundamental game engine for Elder Scrolls 6 and Starfield. That was the name of the video that Yong had created. The funny bit of meme in this article is that Jason, I don't know why I said it like a middle school nerd, but he labels him a YouTube provocateur and says that he's essentially spreading things that aren't accurate and are even just misleading. The audio wouldn't be cutting. It's probably just my voice is not picking it up on whenever there's a pause, the noise gate is probably canceling it. Every now and then that happens. But anyway, Jason has a bit of an interesting past. Somebody mentioned the damage control article that he did for the Diablo Immortal problem. Sorry, let me get the mic a little bit closer to me. I try and turn down my mic because sometimes I can get a little bit too loud, but I've recently turned down my mic more so maybe I was having issues with it. Sorry about that. The beauty of these websites such as Kotaku, and again, here's us uncovering a mystery for ourselves, like right in front of our eyes, live on the podcast, right? I click on this guy, Jason Schreier, right? And the beauty of this place is like, the beauty of the internet, I would say, is that it'll give you whatever article or post this person has created, right? So he's created a book, apparently, Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. He's told the stories of Uncharted 4, Destiny, and Star Wars 1313. Okay, so the first thing that should jump out to you is that these are very mainstream games. That means that this person is likely what you would call a official journalist. That means that they either got a degree in it or they've put enough work into a smaller company and managed to move up the ranks, right? They've gotten the ability to cover larger games, because when you work for Kotaku or for whatever news agency you work for, they don't just put you on Michael Jordan right away, right? They're going to put you on, interview these guys on the side a little bit first, right? So that's just a little bit of like information we can pick up from this person. But other things that I noticed, obviously, is the post or the article we just mentioned, in which he's defending the criticisms about Bethesda's game engine, which we'll further explain in a second, but I wanted to go back further. Here we go. Some theories about the Diablo Immortal backlash. Somebody in chat found this. I appreciate you finding this. Apparently, he postulates, why was the backlash so severe? And why didn't they see it coming? He leads with, I can promise everybody that it's in development. So to the people who freaked out, don't freak out any longer. So essentially his argument is, oh, it's obviously in development. I can promise you it's in development. So nobody should have freaked out regarding the Diablo Immortal announcement, which obviously we can see what the issue is with that. Although, yes, certainly the game probably is in development, and many of us, postulate that Diablo 4 is in development. To not to make this point here means that you just fundamentally don't understand why Diablo Immortal is problematic. We've gone over it ad nauseum on the channel, obviously during our podcast, so I don't really need to go, further into that. Anyway, and so when you start to scroll down a little bit more, you notice that he seems pretty interested in kind of opening up discussion on both sides, right? But then he kind of goes down like further into this. Again, let me post this just so you people can read this. Near the end, you kind of see, actually, he makes the point for me. I don't even have to say anything. I'll just read what he says. He says, the reason that Fallout 76, he says, here's Starfield, blah, 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 you want... No, that's not the part that I was looking for. Dang it, I'm trying to find the part that I was just reading. No, I think I think this might not be the article that I'm thinking about. Or sorry, the quote, rather. This isn't the quote. He doesn't make the quote that I think that he made in this one. I think he's actually pretty fair here. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. This is a hugely popular... This thing has 150k hits. That means that Jason is certainly a serious writer. He's been around for a while. We've already determined that just from watching immediately. He obviously only seems to cover what's essentially the equivalent of a AAA game, which is, again, not completely out of the ordinary. But that gives you a particular slant about him. Now, to go back to what I was talking about with the Bethesda game engine, this is the article that I think that he probably outs himself a little bit more than he tries to, right? Because, again, he mentions what I said earlier about essentially the argument that he makes is the same argument that Bethesda would make, which is that, look, guys, we realize that our engine has problems now, but we're constantly iterating on it, and we're trying to fix these engines, or fix our engine. Nobody just abandons their engine, right? That's the argument that you see quite often. Nobody just abandons their engine. No one's just going to get rid of CryEngine. No one's just going to all right, Epic Games just says, all right, Unreal, you've had your end. No more Unreal 5, so we're just going to delete Unreal because it's no longer good enough. Yes, nobody actually expects that. We know that software, especially software, is iterative, and it needs multiple versions. That's why Windows has had, a bajillion different versions, 10 or quadrillion at this point, because there's so many different versions amongst each one. The Ultimate, the Silver, the whatever else, Super version. Point being, software is iterative, right? We know that a thing like an engine is going to require hundreds, if not thousands, of updates in order to function properly. Again, the argument is not that you throw away the creation engine because it's not going to ever get better. The argument is that we throw away the creation engine because it's clearly got a fundamental issue that keeps resurfacing with multiple titles, right? I would probably say that more so characterizes what people's criticism is about the engine. It's not that it's inherently a bad engine, outright, because it's had good games. There certainly have been good experiences from such an engine, but it's that it's had a lot of the same issues when it does have issues. And so people are starting to realize, why is Bethesda so married to this engine? And obviously, there's multiple reasons for this, but the most likely reason, and again, this is probably the easiest to defend reason, is simply money, right? Engines are expensive. It costs hundreds of millions of dollars to create engines, and it costs obviously millions of dollars to run engines, to set up server infrastructure. That's why these days it's becoming more and more common to just use Unreal, right? Or just use Unity, or just use Spatial OS, use other multiplayer platforms, so you don't even have to handle your own backend. That's becoming a lot more common. But Bethesda has always stuck to its creation engine, and obviously they have many issues or many reasons for that I'm sure that we can't even quite possibly comprehend because we don't know enough about the engine yet. Some of those, for example, could be perhaps the creation engine. I know it's going to be memed a little bit, but maybe it's good at creating. Maybe they stick to the creation engine because they like how easily moddable it is, right? there's certain reasons that you want to stick to an old type of tech, right? Or a tech that you've been using for such a long time. It makes sense to want to stick with a given product. And often, you know, people are creatures of habit. They'll kind of stick to what they know, not to mention their you know, programmer base is probably used to using such an engine at this point. But again, that's beside the point. People's main issue isn't that they think that it can't be fixed. It's that they think that it keeps having similar issues and it keeps repeating the similar issues. So people are extrapolating that because of that, it means that there is a flaw with the engine itself, right? I think that's a very fair assessment. Even if us, as an audience, we don't really, or the consumer base, we don't really know the inner workings of an engine, that's a very fair assumption, is that either they can't fix it, right? Because they keep having these issues, or there's just something inherently wrong with the engine for them to keep having such issues. So, you know, Jason goes on to kind of continue to make that point. He talks about Frostbite. He talks about Unreal. He says they're not immutable creations. They've gotten constantly changed. They've had constant updates, etc. Right? He's essentially making the argument that I just mentioned before. He said Unreal came out in '98. Unreal Engine 4 is still around. It's stupid for people to criticize not just the Fallout 76 engine, the creation engine. It's stupid to criticize them using it in a future title, which is actually essentially the major point that YongYea makes in his video regarding this topic. He essentially says, like, if we already know that the creation engine is having trouble with Fallout 76, then why are we going to use it again on Elder Scrolls 6 or Starfield, right? It's kind of a simplistic question, and you could even argue is a bit silly of a question, right? Because ultimately we know, obviously, there's an innumerable amount of reason why they would want to use the same engine. We can say that it is a fair criticism to say that if you're having such tech issues with Fallout 76 and you're trying to make these next-gen games, that perhaps maybe it's time for them to abandon this old engine that has served them well in the past, but isn't performing as effective as Unreal Engine is, right? It just simply isn't. I don't think there's an argument to say that they are. I think it's a very fair criticism to say that if you take every Bethesda game and give them a better engine, and when I say better, I know that's like hard to kind of like quantify. When I say better, I just simply mean just, you know, objectively better, right? Those games play much more different and could potentially, obviously, reach that next level of success, which I know is crazy to think about, but even that next level, and the perfect example to me is like a game like Morrowind. Like, think about the engine that Morrowind had. You know, the Gamebryo engine, obviously the early version of the creation engine. It was horrible combat. Unfortunately, it makes that game unplayable to a vast majority of new age fans, right? And that's simply because if you've ever played Morrowind at this point, the combat is, and again, I'm not talking about the fact that it's based on a hit chance. You can change that with a mod. I just mean literally just the engine itself. Your guy's kind of sitting there and doing this like stabbing motion, and he's like running around. Like it's just not the best like gameplay experience. I don't ever recommend playing Morrowind in the third person, for example, because it just looks super silly. But even sitting there in first person and just like spamming your little dagger, because your little animations like kind of seems like you're almost like trying to flip like a coin or something when you're trying to stab people. All well documented issues with Morrowind, right? But now obviously imagine that with a different game. So I think, again, it's a fair thing to ask the question of, if you're having these problems and you've had these problems in the past, why don't you just get away from using that engine and just use another engine? And again, at the end of the day, we'll never really know why. And it probably has to do with money. It almost always does. But I think it's very fair for us as fans to say, when is enough with an engine that is, continuing to have considerable issues? And they, largely fix them towards the end. But I think nearly all of us can remember the amount of buggy experiences we've had in a Fallout game recently, especially, I would say. Anyway. Now, Yong made a response video in which he kind of, called out him referring to him as a YouTube provocateur, right? And because I have no interest in sitting through and watching this thing slowly, just as none of you do, I'll put it on 0.5 speed.
Fellow viewers, it is I, YouTube provocateur Yong here, and I have returned to provoke discussion yet again to my mindless minions, the
So obviously he's being sarcastic,
hundreds
right?
of thousands of subscribers.
He's probably not very happy about being called out by this Jason guy. Very understandable, right? Like, no one wants to be called out to 150,000 people calling you a provocateur.
I'll pin that label proudly. All joking aside, though, let's discuss the contents of Jason's article, which is primarily a response to a Forbes article that criticized Bethesda's decades-old game engine as a liability, before highlighting one particular statement that Todd Howard provided to website GameStar back in June 2018 that many fans expressed their concern over. Todd Howard said, quote, "For Fallout 76, we have changed a lot. The game uses a new renderer, a new lighting system, and a new system for the landscape generation. For Starfield, even more of it changes, and for I am of Bethesda games, as many fond memories I've made with them, the one thing that's holding them back right now is their aging technology, which has failed to keep up with each iteration. You look at current generation games like Fallout 4 and Fallout 76, and anyone who's played Bethesda games throughout the years will tell you that they are plagued by similar issues as older titles like Oblivion and even Morrowind. There have obviously been a lot of enhancements over the years. Graphics have generally gotten better. New game mechanics like seamless conversation."
I think this wouldn't necessarily be a big point if Unreal Engine 4 hasn't done as particularly well as it has done recently. And what I mean by that is that you guys remember Unreal 3 had innumerable issues. It had tons of issues on consoles, horrible issues. I mean, can we even begin to talk about the MMOs that used it? Bless Online, AI Heroes, is it Infinity Realm? That game's Ascent Infinity Realm or whatever it's called is going to use Unreal 3. That looks kind of Blade and Soul uses Unreal 3. Like, Unreal 3 certainly had a lot of negative stigma, right? But they turned the corner with Unreal 4. So in that case, it makes sense, right? They didn't just abandon their technology. They stuck by it, and they were willing to work on it, right? Because that's what you do with software. You iterate, you fix it, you fix the code, you get more code, right? And try and overcome the previous hurdles that you had with previous edition or whatever else. But because Unreal 4 was so successful, I feel like maybe it's up the game and up the level of expectation that we have from an engine, to the point to where now we're a lot more unforgiving when it comes to engines, because we had to deal with Unreal 3, right? We had to deal with CryEngine in a couple of games. We had to deal with Gamebryo 60 billion times, because Gamebryo is the engine for Rift, it's the engine for Dark Age of Camelot, it's the engine for Warhammer. You guys want me to keep going? It's surprisingly the engine for a lot of different MMOs, and obviously is the engine for basically the whole Bethesda franchise at this point. Obviously, Creation Engine is a newer version of that tech, but the point that I'm trying to make is that Unreal 3 wasn't too great, right? But it picked up the slack with Unreal 4. Creation Engine at this point, I couldn't tell you what point it is. Is it 5.0, 6.0, whatever 0.0 it is? It's obviously launched 6 to 7 to counting their Gamebryo games, 10 games, 15 games in total. When is it going to turn that corner? When is it going to have that Unreal Engine 4 moment, right? Hero Engine or Riot? Hey, Hero Engine was one of the first MMO engines. It was an engine created almost solely for the for MMOs.
With NPCs.
Anyway, let's continue this.
Aspects of gameplay have seen a number of refinements, but at the same time, in many regards, Fallout 4 and Fallout 76 look and feel as dated as Oblivion.
He's making the same argument that I just explained now, basically, saying that although we're seeing minor improvements, they don't seem to be major enough. He brought up Oblivion, Fallout 76 as big examples, which obviously are the more negative examples, which serves his point, but is still a fine point to make.
Here when he collects them. Rather than write new code and create new animations for all of these things, you might take what you built for the first game and reuse it, bundling
Can y'all
all
hear
of
the
those
volume
features
alright?
together as a physics system. Combine those physics system with some other systems, like a level editor and a memory management tool, and you've got an engine, a collection of software that you can use from game to game in order to avoid
Yeah, sunk cost fallacy is also another very common coding issue.
When we use terms like Unreal or Frostbite, that's what we're talking about, a framework for making games. These are not immutable creations, and in fact, a game's programmers will alter an engine's features constantly based on what suits their needs. Most games
Okay, we've already read this part.
as Howard implies in that quote, but that's just one component of an engine that has been changing for years and years. This is not uncommon, by the way, as one game developer pointed out to me this morning. Even the ubiquitous Unreal Engine 4.
So basically the audience of this kind of video, by the way, I just realized it. It's like if you just don't want to read the articles, period. So he just like, because like he was doing the analysis in the beginning, but now he's just reading the article. So like, I guess we should just skip by all of this stuff. Yeah, an engine isn't a single program or piece of technology. It's a collection. Okay.
Pick. I'm sure the engine can be iterative. There's a reason why some games are made on the Unity engine and others in do something.
Okay, so when it's like highlighted, does that mean that he just reads whatever is on screen? Sorry, I just what's the point in this like 7 minutes of content right here? I feel like he could have just like taken all of this out and just assumed that you already read the article. But I guess his audience wouldn't read the article. So sorry. Anyway. So
but whatever Epic Games is doing with Unreal or whatever Guerrilla Games is doing with Decima, it's actually working, which is why people won't complain about.
Right, so it seems like the crux of his argument is what I said previously. It's like you look at Unreal 4, it's the standard. So then everything starts to look by association much worse, and people are starting to wonder why Bethesda, a million/billion-dollar company, is still struggling with engine problems. Again, fair points, fair criticism. I don't see anything out of the ordinary here.
Framework still be similar enough that it will cause the same problems we have known for so long. Now, something else Jason might be saying is that Todd Howard's quote here doesn't necessarily indicate that Gamebryo won't receive drastic enhancements. That Todd Howard...
Maybe you're an outlier then, Goosey, because I feel like if you were the normal audience, he wouldn't have like a 6-minute segment where he's just literally reading. Like, I kind of thought that like right here he was going to read and then like give his little like a bit on it. But if you look at it, there's literally no time in the video. Like he's literally just reading the whole thing.
Howard straight up says changes will come for future games and that there's no reason to panic.
The only reason why I say this, by the way, guys, is this, in terms of like quality of a video, takes me probably like as much as it takes this guy. You can make this video in a day. You're just reading. You're just reading like the article out.
Well, that's your take on it. Just looking for a general sense of polish and modern refinement that is simply not present in their games. Granted,
okay, here comes the analysis. That's what I'm waiting for.
The engine won't be enhanced in such a way that it might finally feel like something new, something overhauled. But given Bethesda's track record, until Bethesda can prove the creation engine framework can be enhanced to adequately compete with others out there, thinking that perhaps Bethesda would be better off finding or building a new framework in parallel to the ongoing development of upcoming games isn't an unreasonable prospect to think about. Graphics can improve, animations can improve, new features can be added, gameplay can be refined, and new renderers and engines can be layered on top for sure. But when it's the house frame residing behind the walls, underneath the floors, and beyond the furniture and the paint that's compromised, then the whole house is compromised no matter how much you spruce it up. Or to use Jason's own analogy, old rice and chicken will still taste like old rice and chicken regardless of whether you use it to make Chinese or Indian food. The spices, sauces, and condiments might be able to cover it up to some extent, but the core ingredients of these dishes are chicken and rice, and when that's compromised, the whole dish is compromised.
Oh wait, so when his face comes on screen, that's when the analysis is coming. Here it comes.
There to suggest that this is a possibility. So yeah, that's my take on the situation, folks. I hope you got something out of my latest provocation. I'd love to hear your provocations on this matter in the comments below.
Wait, why is this still going? Why is the video still going?
Down his nose at those who question him, of calling people out and expressing dissent over a topic based on your knowledge, beliefs, and ideals. Either way, I will say that I think that Bethesda should...
That's a really good point. So for you guys who missed that.
Game consumers. He also encouraged in his articles have been to the depth. Certainly he genuinely cares about the issues expressing though I would argue that many of them in themselves have provoked certain game publishers.
I think he left his best point towards the end.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Even his latest article does its fair share of provoking, if that's his definition of calling people out and expressing dissent over a topic based on your knowledge, beliefs, and ideals. Either way, I will say that I think he genuinely cares about the issues he speaks about. I think there's some good insight there in his latest article that's worth a read, and I most certainly don't think he's a corporate shill or anything, as some like to claim, especially since many of his investigative reports have been to the detriment of game companies and to the benefit of readers and video game consumers. He also encouraged in his article that Bethesda should be criticized for their games' bugs and graphical failings, though again, his argument is that the whole notion of Bethesda not working on a new engine is misguided due to a misinterpretation of what a game engine actually is. I personally don't agree with that last part, though.
Yeah, it's a bit of an equivocation. I think Young's being pretty fair on here. From his perspective, he's just like, hey, I'm just giving you my like simple opinion of this, and you're trying to say, well, you don't know all the inner workings. And Young's argument is essentially, yeah, I don't, and most of us don't, but I can still react to something in the best way that I can, which is given my knowledge and given my skill set and given my ability to understand things, which, you know, as with most of Young's content, it's going to be pretty upfront, right? It's very much upfront. It's going to be, in this case, if the engine is so good, why isn't it good now, right? So then therefore, if the engine isn't good and doesn't seem to be good or getting better, then we should just get rid of it. And again, that's not something that lacks merit. Like, I think that there could be an argument there, but the only problem, and this is the important thing that someone like Yong should probably in the future as a journalist, because that's essentially what he is, even if he doesn't consider himself one, should be very careful about not mentioning. And it's that although you might believe it's better for them in the end to abandon their engine, you have to be very careful about not putting in a preface or a disclaimer there. And that disclaimer should say, but I don't exactly know what particular issues they face, and I don't claim to understand their major issues regarding the engine. Because I think if you don't mention that last part, it maybe kind of creates more of like a hate train towards the engine, which kind of just, again, goes back to what I was saying earlier about hating a game. Just hating an engine because you hate the engine, because that's the narrative, isn't a good thing. Because as many people in chat have already said, like, there's engines that have been running for 20, 30 years now. So it's like, you don't abandon what works sometimes, generally, right? Just because it doesn't work sometimes. Obviously, in the case of Fallout 76, it particularly isn't doing very well, but I actually think that in this case is specifically because of the creation engine's problem with being a multiplayer game. So the argument that I would make is that in Fallout 76's case, it's probably not good for them to use the same engine, but then at the same time, I don't think it's necessarily wrong for them to want to use it on Starfield or what's that other game that they're trying to create? Yeah, Starfield, that's the name of it. Can't remember the games these days anymore. Or Elder Scrolls 6. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if they used a creation engine or some version of the creation engine. But in Fallout 76's case, literally creating a multiplayer platform from scratch, that's really what this whole Fallout 76 thing is to me. It's like this experiment of like, can we actually make our engine a multiplayer engine? Can we iterate on it and potentially in the future use it for future games in a successful fashion? Obviously, it's not particularly working well so far, but they're not out of the woods yet. I mean, look at No Man's Sky. If No Man's Sky could make somewhat of a comeback, then you bet your ass that Fallout 76 can certainly make a comeback. If Bethesda wanted to fix the engine, they could license the mods their community makes to fix the games. I'm sorry, I'm not sure. Yeah, Limp Boss, look, for you guys, I like to be as as honest as I possibly can be. I personally have an issue with content that's similar to Yong Yea's, because it reminds me an awful lot of Clean Prince Gaming, which is essentially a guy with a pen and paper who's just reacting to news as it comes out, right? An important role in society, obviously. He's had level of success because of that. All of those different YouTubers have. And they generally kind of will agree on what's considered general opinion, because you will always appeal or agree with general opinion if articles and news retelling events is primarily what you do, right? Like, unless you're a political scientist who's going to dive into the poll results of something, or you're some kind of investigator, or, you know, crazy, I guess, like me, and you find it really interesting to look at random links about the CEO of Rift or whatever else at the time. Generally speaking, recounting an event or recounting an article or a bit of news is going to be pretty like formulaic, right? It's going to be, you're more so focused on getting across what actually happened, which is, in this case, say, for example, Bethesda's continuing to use their previous engine. That's kind of the news. And so there isn't really like a big, deep analysis or journalist dive, right? And when I say journalist dive, what that means is, in journalism, they teach you a concept where you need to tell people how, why, when, where. And I guess I would add one more on there, which is why you should care, right? I guess maybe that could be the why to some extent, but why could kind of be taken in two different ways. But those are probably the most important things when it comes to like being like a journalist. And again, you can look this stuff up. This stuff's online. I'm not trying to speak as an authority of journalism. Those are probably pretty common things that are mentioned, right? But when you do a reaction article video, which is what I call this sort of video, not this one in particular, but the sort of video that Yong typically does, you don't have enough time to do analysis. And I want to stress that because it might come across like some people either have a malicious intent, or that when other people criticize such people, they have a malicious intent towards them, when it's more so just that I don't think anything bad of this person, right? Same thing as, I don't think like Yong or other YouTubers rather who are similar to such content who do article reaction videos are bad. It's more so that I think that they can be a little bit misleading because they're not actually informing you about why something is important. They're just telling you something is important. So although that's important and has worked for thousands of years, what it essentially does is it creates a fan base, or it creates an audience who doesn't know why something is problematic or the critical reasons behind something being problematic, but just knows that something is a problem. And that, again, can be problematic because sometimes it can kind of give you the wrong perspective of something. Sometimes when things are considered problems or whatever else, right? You actually like look at the quality of the game and you realize that even though this is a big problem, it isn't enough to overshadow the entire game. Remember, I brought up the Majora's Mask comparison or analogy. There's tons of other analogies that you could use. So that's kind of one of the things that I get a little bit scared with such content creators. And again, this is not to pick on any particular person. This is just talking about them more so broadly. I know we've brought up Yong, but that's more so because I wanted to also talk about Jason. These two guys apparently have had a disagreement and even took it to YouTube to do some sort of debate video, which even though Limpos hates when I talk about other content creators, because he's jealous. No, I'm just kidding. I like to hear when journalists disagree with each other. Right? Again, I call Yong a journalist because even if I just made the criticism of him that I did make, he is sharing news. He is very much somebody you go to get news. It's just that with that news doesn't really come a whole lot of content with it, right? He's just kind of giving you the news. And I think that that's problematic in a way because when you don't tell your audience where you stand and you don't put more time into something to actually analyze it and provide context, you can give, as I said, a wrong impression of things, but you can also potentially misinform your audience. And that actually was an argument that Jason was making on Twitter. Let me see if I can find these guys' responses on Twitter. That's not it. I guess I could just pull up his Twitter and just scroll down. Okay, here we go. So Jason responds with, here, let me put this on screen. He says, Hey, I'm all for slamming game companies, but my issue with your work is that you often spread misinformation and uninformed theories, like the idea that Blizzard is stretching itself too thin by working on mobile games. I'd be happy to come on and chat anytime. Okay, so the way that he's formed his criticism here seems pretty fair. I actually do agree that one of the issues, as I literally just outlined with such content, is that it doesn't actually explain something. So it can give you information, but the audience doesn't necessarily know what to do with the information. That's the most simplest way. If I can leave you guys with anything, it's that if a content creator or a journalist doesn't actually take the time to explain information, it basically puts the burden on the person who hears the information to explain it to themselves or to actually fully comprehend it. Which I know some people would kind of scoff at such a thing because they're like, well, duh, it should be. But people, as we know, can kind of be misled, right? It's easy to mislead people. Statistics can be misleading. Science can be misleading, right? Many things can be misleading. Even our eyes can mislead us, right? Our vision can blur. Sometimes we don't even see colors that we're supposed to see. Colors aren't even a real thing, right? People just name what they saw, right? Just a differentiation of light, right? There isn't darkness. There's just no light. Okay, I'm getting a little bit too over the top here, but you get my point. It is a bit of a fair criticism. Now, the thing is like at the very end when he says stretching itself too thin by working on mobile games, this is where you have to realize in order to actually factually make such a claim, you would need to know the inner workings of Blizzard. So that means that if I were to ever make a claim to you guys that, oh, Blizzard's pushing themselves way too thin, you would then probably ask or wonder, how are they pushing themselves too thin? Because they're working on so many games. It's like, it could be true that they're pushing themselves thin because they're working on multiple games at the same time, but people also forget that Bethesda, or companies like Bethesda, can have hundreds and hundreds of workers. So it's like, while EA certainly works on a large amount of projects, their dev team size, counting all of the studios that they own and acquired, is probably in the thousands and thousands, right? So what I'm saying is that, yes, it can seem on the surface like a company is being really pushed to its max, but if it has the correct support team and the correct number of developers working on it and the correct amount of support, it's very possible for large corporations to work on multiple products. This is very common in big corporations, especially ones that work on especially publishers, right? They often have multiple subsidiaries who work on games for them, so they don't have to worry about the development part itself, right? Even Bethesda has published in the past. But it is a fair assumption to make. Again, these are things that Yong does. He makes assumptions because when you don't actually take the time to analyze something, all you can do is make an assumption because you don't fully understand it yet. So if the assumption made was, well, because they're working on too many games at the same time, and they've recently came out and said that they're putting their best developers, an actual quote from from Blizzard in this case. I'm doing... Sorry, guys. I do this thing sometimes where I'm reading Bethesda up there, and I'm meaning to say Blizzard here in the post that I'm actually highlighting. So, although this does apply to Bethesda, because they do mobile games, and they do multiple games at the same time in development. In fact, I think they have like 4 or 5 or whatever right now that are major games in development. I actually mean Blizzard. I think it's fair, right? Blizzard made the claim that they're putting their best developers on the mobile games. That literally could just be corporate speak, right? That could just mean we're putting our best developers, aka the Chinese company that we're working with on the side, right? Like, that could be corporate speak. It could literally mean nothing, right? And it could actually just mean that they just have the copycat company working on the game or whatever else, like people are already assuming based on the game, the way it looks and the way that their previous game, I think it's called like Children of... What's their previous game called? Something of Light. That Asian company that's working on Diablo Immortal. Anyway, in order to actually know, right, the only way you could actually know is if you could somehow figure out. Funny enough, judging if a company is spreading itself too thin is actually incredibly, incredibly difficult, even if you have the inner workings of a company, right? Even if you have the books, even if I can open up the books right now and see like the in and out, the negatives and the pluses, even in that case, it's hard to know if you're stretching yourself too thin. So making a claim just on an innocent basis, such as this, saying that because they're working on these games, because they've said that they've done this, I think that this is a pretty fair assumption. But I think in Jason's case here, he's trying to say that you can't actually quantify that statement. You can't actually show me evidence, or you don't actually have any specific knowledge of the scenario. And although Yong likely has never made the claim that he does, when you speak in a reactionary fashion, right? When you're reacting to a bit of data without actually having the time to analyze the data, you can come across as uninformed, or you might actually seem like you know more than you actually know, right? That's the biggest problem I've seen people having with like Downward Thrust and Clean Prince Gaming as journalists. And sorry, probably shouldn't call them that. Sorry, guys, but as content creators, that's been the big issue with those two guys. Is like, A, have you played the game ever? B, are you just repeating whatever the general consensus is on this, and you're not actually providing any of your own analysis? So, like, I can kind of see that to some extent, where maybe Jason thinks of it from the perspective of, like, you're speaking about this and you're just saying, hey, it's just my opinion, bro. But your opinion can reach 600,000 people. His sub-audience is 600,000. He's had videos in the millions of views, right? So I can kind of understand that. I think it could be a little bit pedantic. And again, I think it's a fair assumption by Yong to assume that, you know, based on the statements and the way that Blizzard has been acting with Diablo, that maybe they are spreading themselves too thin. I think obviously a more fair statement, an easier to defend statement that Yong could have made regarding this would simply be that not that they're spreading themselves too thin, but that perhaps they've lost the pulse of the audience, right? That's something that's a little bit easier to defend because it's a bit more of an opinion statement, but it's also something that we can readily defend just based on, you know, the current state of events. But that's just a little bit of a, I guess, a point that I would prefer that he would word differently there. Anyway, I very much appreciate this. First, let me say that I very much appreciate these two guys being quite upfront with each other, being willing to have the conversation to see why they disagree. For people who wonder why this is even relevant to someone such as me, I work in gaming now, and certainly gaming journalism, at least trying to. And this is something that I think does need to be addressed. These certain types of things. I think that Yong in this case is mostly just making a harmless point that he doesn't even think is particularly big, because it's, again, following what the common line of thinking is, whereas Jason is essentially beating him up because he thinks that he shouldn't make such claims without the right kind of knowledge or understanding of the situation. And I actually think that that's a good point. So now that I've kind of built that whole thing, and although I don't like that I've probably colored some of your perspectives, I hope you ultimately understand that I think that both sides make good points and both bring up very good perspectives in regards to gaming and gaming journalism. They actually, too, in particular, are very much what I would describe as mainstream journalists, right? They cover the biggest, most popular stories. So it's interesting to see such, you know, two types of people be at odds with each other's content. Obviously, I'm not going to watch this entire thing. At this
everyone.
point,
Welcome to.
Let me make sure I haven't missed anything else that I wanted to share with you guys. Before I get into this and finish this off, I just wanted to briefly talk about. Let's move to MMOs on the go really quickly. I wanted to briefly get to this section today because I wanted to highlight a couple things I've seen in the world of MMOs. So let's talk about that first before we do a little bit more of a deep dive into this journalism PvP. The first thing I wanted to talk about is the Final Fantasy 14 expansion. Shadowbringers, apparently, it's being dubbed. Let me play this trailer on screen. What? This isn't the trailer? Apparently someone's saying that the trailer is a spoiler? Man, where the heck is the trailer for this thing? Here it is. It's mobile RuneScape. Hey, that's like the same dude, right? He's had his flashbacks. MMO trailers, aren't they like so terrible? Like cinematic trailers? They basically tell you like nothing about the game at all. I know we love cinematic trailers because they look awesome, but I guess maybe in my older age, I'm just like, whatever happened to doing feature trailers? Remember when MMOs used to do feature trailers? Where it would just be like, features of the game, and it would show we have X amount of monsters and X amount of dungeons, and this is super unique about this game and this expansion, and like, a lot of old school content used to be like that, where they would just like basically show you in video form what's new and what's cool. But people, when it comes to which one you should put out first, they're most probably going to agree that the cinematic one, like this trailer, is probably much more sexy to release first. But I don't know, it's just... Sorry, what did you post? Yeah, so this actually is even worse than I mentioned earlier. Thank you for posting that. All right, I guess I'll turn off my ad block if you're gonna put the gun to my head, VG247. Little bit of update in regards to the Fallout stuff. I forgot to actually mention this. This was an article I saw yesterday, but here's it now on screen. Fallout 76 UK launch sales are over 80% down compared to Fallout 4. So obviously doesn't mean anything entirely, but it certainly means that it's not performing as well, which is a cause for pause. I think what's more telling is its performance on Twitch, to be honest, because I think it's more so designed to be a Twitch audience type of game than, say, for example, a single player Fallout 4 would be. But still, certainly shows that maybe our voices do matter, boys. Maybe they do. Anyway, there's a little write-up on this. Let me pull it up really quickly. Someone did a little breakdown of what the expansion is adding. Just so my Final Fantasy XIV fans don't hate that I didn't mention this today. New jobs, I think they're bringing is it the Blue Mage? People were saying that they're bringing in as well. There's a higher level cap. Looks like balancing, some new areas, new dungeon, new game plus. Huh? I want to know what this is. Is this some kind of like progression server, maybe? Or a hard mode of leveling? I would love this. If this was like a specific way that you could play the game, where you could like actually choose to make your leveling experience harder, but it gives you like more rewards or maybe more like vanity items. This potentially has like the ability to be a fucking genius idea. I really think that this is a no-brainer idea. I'm surprised more MMOs haven't done this. I'm really geeked about this idea. It just allows you to replay the story with your current gear. Of course, they had to find a way to make it lame, but in my head, it sounded much cooler than it actually is, which is like, imagine we could play an MMO where after we reach max level, we can then make another character. By the way, something SWTOR did very well. Something SWTOR did is the concept of legacy levels, which means your account has an overall level. So it incentivized you to play with multiple accounts because you could have an overall legacy level that was a certain threshold that could give you more experience, access to speeder earlier in your leveling process, and essentially made the game more fun to re-level in. What if we had such a re-level system as similar to that, but also had this new game experience where you reload the game. Not only do you get these level experience bonuses or even just like vanity items or whatever else, sort of like I said, like SWTOR did with Legacy system, but you get harder mobs, a harder storyline, like in terms of its difficulty levels. I think it's a really like interesting idea. I'm surprised. It's incapable of doing something innovative. SWTOR has its story in different difficulties. You mean like group story? Or are you talking about like planet quests or elite quests on planets? Because the actual story itself is so easy. I could probably beat SWTOR. Actually, I did an MMO lab on SWTOR and I literally killed one of the bosses with my eyes closed. So, I mean, I don't even want to get into SWTOR actually. So, forgive me for bringing it up. But anyway, that was a cool little idea. You can actually select the chapter's difficulty? Where can you select the chapter's difficulty? This must be a new feature, because this doesn't sound like it was in the game when I was playing it. Or wait, I don't know if you made the distinction yet, but are you talking about a flashpoint? Because, I mean, that's been in the game since the beginning. But the majority of the storyline, you can't change the difficulty to it. Anyway, there's also been another announcement that I wanted to bring up as well. Smilegate, the developer of Lost Ark, has stated that they do have interest and do intend to bring Lost Ark to the NA and EU regions. Lost Ark, of course, if I remember correctly, is one of the few MMOs out there right now that's using the Unreal Engine 4. It's obviously a really good looking game. Is an ARPG game of sorts. Kind of, really, I mean, the idea that people had with a Diablo Immortal title is kind of what Lost Ark is attempting to be. Of course, it's, I think, recently launching or is launching. It says right here, actually. It's launching on March 17th. Wow. 7 years of development time with over 100 billion in won in production cost. Wow. Wow. That's crazy. That's insane. I'm really curious, first off, how long it's going to take for them to get this port to NA or in EU. We're probably talking years at this point. It depends. I mean, Ion did it in 1 year. ArcAge did it in 2 or 3? No, was it 2? I think ArcAge did it in 2. Blade and Soul did it in like 4 for some insane reason. Bless did it in like 4 or 5. That's why it looks so ancient. And Lineage 2 launched, it actually launched in America. So yeah, I would say it's probably a good guess to say that it would take between 2 to 4 years. But I would hope that it would take less. I mean, again, there have been companies, including NCSoft, in Korea have managed to do it with just 1 year. So we'll see. I mean, we don't want another Bless. We don't want another shitty we don't want another shitty KR clone of a game that is not even fully translated and isn't even unique in any way, shape, or form, meaning that they don't change the way it's marketed, they don't change the way its business plan works, all of that sort of stuff. I hope that that's kind of fading away, and I hope that, you know, with a company, in this case, like Smilegate, I do hope that with Lost Ark, they're not going to just blanket it with the same responses or, problems that other games have had in the past that have been adaptations in the Western market, Asian adaptations. And what I mean by that is that obviously the microtransactions, building them free to play, and allowing there to be more than just pay to convenience, but actually pay to win in certain cases. We'll see. Obviously, at this current state, I would say that I'm very apprehensive when it comes to Korean MMOs, just because of the response. I mean, I don't feel like it's out of the question to think that way. But I will say Lost Ark looks really cool and looks really fun. So I'm really excited to play the game in 2052. So that we have that one to look forward to, boys. Another AAA MMO. Okay, last bit of MMO history, or news rather, for today, is going to be another announcement from NCSoft at one of their press conferences. Okay, this needs to be translated. This was after my last week announcement, where I basically said that Lineage 2, Ion, and Blade and Soul were all getting their own PC editions of sorts. Sorry, mobile editions of sorts. Ion 2 was on the mobile device, announced on the mobile device. Blade and Soul, Lineage 2. Those were all announced, I think, about 2 weeks ago, just for the mobile devices. Obviously, I talked about this in my Ion video, and I certainly have been a little bit, I don't want to say down, because although I don't necessarily think that NCSoft has the best record when it comes to launching games in America, I do think that they're much better than the majority of publishers, especially in regards to Blade and Soul, the way that was handled. I think it was handled much better than Ion. So I think that they certainly have been learning, and I don't think we should rule them out in that regard as a publisher. But I will say that them announcing that they're working on some PC titles and that they're being developed internally right now, this is literally the exact same thing that Blizzard is going through. Isn't this hilarious to think about? That in Korea, you know, thousands of miles away from me right now, or even us, wherever you are to some extent, how far and out of reach their market is from us, but how it's really kind of corollary in a lot of ways. And what I mean by that is that Blizzard is obviously realizing the success in Korea and China and Asian markets with mobile devices and mobile MMOs, and they're trying to cash in on that. NCSoft has already been cashing in on that recently. They made, I think, about 500 million. The last time I checked, I think it was Q1 with their mobile games that just recently have started coming out. So they're clearly they know the success with the mobile market. But this is another one of those examples where like they do this big announcement and they announce all these mobile games, and then after the fact they're like, "Oh yeah, and by the way, we got PC games coming as well." If that doesn't like have some sort of like weird foreboding nature to it, or if it's not of a foreboding nature to any of you, or it doesn't put any of you, if it doesn't make your skin prickle and your hair raise up a little bit, it does for me, just because I think mobile MMOs, man, they're coming. They're coming, boys. They're coming. I'm not so happy about it. I'm not so happy about it. And I'm not saying we should be at all. I think we should be very, very afraid. It's the darkest timeline, as I said in my Ion video. Because it's almost like when they start by announcing all of these mobile MMOs and then they later say that, oh, but we are still working on PC titles, it already makes you feel like, yeah, but it's clearly not the focus, right? Otherwise you would have announced that part first. Unless, just like with Blizzard, you're just announcing it after the fact because you realized it was bad PR for them to think that you're not working on a PC title. So many layers, obviously, that go into it. But just as, you know, us being the marketplace, essentially, we are the consumer base. I've talked about Kickstarter being the future of MMOs, and it will be. Kickstarter will innovate. Other MMOs, AAA companies, investors will come back into the space, take those formulas, better implement them, and likely do them in a more broad and generalistic fashion. And the market will essentially keep revolving, right? Innovation is always pushed by the small man. Innovation is always pushed by the person who has who can risk everything, right? Corporations can't risk everything. They're not going to make all of the risk. They're not going to take all of the risk. They're going to take as little risk as possible. But although I've said all of those things, this mobile MMO thing has kind of caught me by surprise, and I certainly wasn't anticipating such a big push, especially from like an American company in Blizzard. I think this is kind of showing us that people are conflating mobile MMOs with like the success of like RuneScape on mobile. RuneScape on mobile is a port. Let's get that out of the way, right? It's an effective port. In fact, it's a port for a game that has always been able to be portable from the perspective of its tech, right? It's not entirely hard to run or play the game. So it makes perfect sense, right? And it's had great success on the mobile devices. I had somebody in my Discord recently tell me that I shouldn't be so worried about mobile MMOs coming because there's great mobile MMOs. And I remember I was like, okay, like what's like a great mobile MMO? He was like, RuneScape. I was like, but RuneScape's a port. Like what's a great like mobile MMO that's just like, it's a great game or even just good, right? I mean, I don't really know of any. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I've tried looking. I've played a couple of these different MMOs. Pocket Heroes, it wasn't that one of them for a while. That one did okay. Point being is the MMO audience should be scared because although it's easy to take the position, say for example, like Jason was, which is saying that, oh, this doesn't mean that their PC titles aren't a focus or aren't a big focus or they're not going to make more PC titles. It doesn't. But what it does mean is that what's starting to inform the market more so is the casual audience, aka the person who's more likely to spend money on a random mobile game, right? Is like the casual audience, I guess you would say. When the casual audience starts to define what the medium is or what the, I guess, rules of engagement are more so than anybody else in the marketplace, what it ends up creating essentially is a scenario where big corporations take next to no risk and just try and appeal to as many people as they possibly can appeal to. That's what makes the mobile market so appealing because it is a giant market. And not only a giant market, it's a market that with over 10 to 15 years of experience in, like in terms of microtransactions, it's been incredibly successful at selling games and selling microtransactions in games, right? It's a market that's essentially used to microtransactions. We used to pay for our ringtones. We used to pay for text messaging, for minutes and all of that sort of stuff. The phone is just synonymous with microtransactions, even just on a base level, right? But more so, obviously, with video games, when you have fatigue systems and endurance systems and energy systems, all of these systems that are specifically designed to tire your character out in the game, so you have to purchase some kind of potion or whatever else to allow you to keep playing the game. I made a video on microtransactions and specifically how they affect the mobile market. There's a lot of reasons to be very, very worried about mobile market and how it's going to affect things. But the beautiful thing is this actually doesn't really affect the MMO market as great as it might seem. And although I certainly led it to believe that it might to some extent, I urge caution, obviously, as I always do with such big market changes, because we have to be vigilant and not let people think that this is totally okay to just only launch mobile MMOs, right? But I think the bigger issue is probably that. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I didn't mean to say the bigger issue. I mean to say that it probably isn't the biggest issue, just simply because, as I said, where innovation is going to come from isn't the mobile MMO market, right? It's not going to innovate. Well, it's going to innovate ways to get your credit card info. It's gonna innovate ways to open your wallet, that's for sure. But it's not going to innovate any MMO mechanics. It's not going to become virtual reality anytime soon. It's not going to replace the visceral feeling you get when you play your favorite multiplayer game on PC, or the sense of progression, the same sense of progression you get when you down a giant dragon in an MMO, right? Mobile games for some time won't be able to match the certain experience that we can get from a PC game. And we don't even have the AAA market to rely on with MMOs anyway. And the AAA market is the one that wants to make these mobile games. So what I'm trying to say is that ultimately, as long as one of these Kickstarter MMOs can work and work with some level of success, that will inform the market to some extent, and it will allow for these other big corporations and companies to come back into the space and hopefully not muck it up this time, like they did with the WoW clone era, or the WoW killer era. Well, the WoW killer era is one era, and the WoW clone era is one era. They're kind of different, because although some WoW killers kind of are clones, Rift, some certainly are more so, an attempt at being a killer more so than a clone, right? Like Age of Conan was designed to be a WoW killer, right? Oh my god, it's going to be a WoW killer. WildStar is a WoW killer. But they're not really like WoW clones in the same way that like Lord of the Rings Online is, or Allods Online is, or Runes of Magic, or insert other billion copycat games. Have you seen the Vatican? All right, so let's get into these. Let's get into this little discussion, this little debate. We don't normally do this on the channel or on the podcast. But it's not very often that we have two journalists who disagree and are willing to voice their concerns in a debate of sorts, or in a discussion of sorts. Typically, what happens is they just badmouth me on another video. No, I'm just kidding, but that's what usually happens with me. Nobody seems to... The other journalists, I never get any shade directed at me yet. So... hopefully, if someone doesn't like the content that I do, they will. Because I always am willing, and you should always be willing to defend yourself. And certainly defend your ideals, which I'm probably sure is what Yong feels like he's defending to some extent, is maybe his ideals and maybe even a bit of his character, right?
Industry discussion with Jason Schreier here, who was kind
I wonder if someone
first things first, welcome.
timestamped this. That'd be great.
Thank you so much for having me on your channel. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. Obviously,
Sorry.
eye to eye on everything, but I think that's no reason to come together and just talk, share our perspectives, see what we can learn.
Wasn't trying to say goodbye to you guys yet.
Like just the back and forths that happen spontaneously and sporadically. So I hope we can have something productive here to share with the audience, and I'm really excited to hear your insight on some of the recent events.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that you and I agree on more things than even we have talked about. I think we have a few key differences that I'm hoping to chat about. But yeah, let's jump right in.
Yeah, let's just jump right in.
Okay.
Obviously, the big topic right now: microtransactions and loot boxes. For me, it really became apparent.
Okay, so this is a very good topic for Yong to start on, and I like that he starts with this topic. He starts with the microtransaction topic with Jason, because this essentially will force Jason into a position where there's no conceivable way that he can defend loot boxes, right? And if the criticism, is most apparent for Jason, it's probably that he's not a real gamer. He's just a journalist or a writer. He only covers major releases, aka he's a shill, right? Because if you cover major releases in video games journalism, what that means is that you're likely one of the more popular or well-known editors or writers or content creators, right? Because typically, the only people who can make careers out of covering the most popular things are people who are at the very top. So like in Jason's case, he's probably the top of his Kotaku bracket or whatever else for games journalism. But the reason why you have to certainly be suspicious, at least, a healthy level of suspicion, not saying you shouldn't just trust people, but a healthy level of suspicion of somebody who only covers major games. The reason is because the way the internet works and the way journalism works in 2018 is that you are most incentivized to make as incendiary of a title or article name as you possibly can, because you immediately need to get somebody's attention and you need to get them to click the video. And I'm not going to make the claim necessarily that all of these people that I'm talking about here are clickbaitists. I don't really think either of them are. That's just a facet of journalism. You have to make an interesting title if you want people to click on it and be willing to read it. But in the case of Jason, when you primarily work for a website such as Kotaku and you only cover major games, this almost guarantees that on some level, your company has taken money from one of these companies. Let me repeat that just so people understand. If you are a big journalist and you work at a company like Kotaku and you cover Red Dead Redemption or you cover Diablo Immortal, it is very likely at some point during Kotaku's life cycle, I should say, they've taken a check from Blizzard. They've taken a check from Bethesda. They've taken a check from whoever else, right? That's because that's what these websites do, right? In order to make money and supplement their businesses and income, they sell ad space and even ad packages. Sometimes, like on game trailers, used to have this. You have this big wrapper in the back that if you click it on the back page, it would link you to a game. Even Rift had ads like this on MMORPG.com and Massively Joystick. Well, now it's called Massively Overpowered. Rest in peace, Massively Joystick. But right? Am I making sense here? So that's more so likely that at some point there's been an exchange in money, and anytime there's an exchange in money, no matter how objective you are as a person or righteous you are as a person, people automatically assume that you might not be as level-headed or objective about that given topic or game or company now, right? It's generally a fair assumption to make. If I work for Coca-Cola and I proceed to make videos that are slandering Coca-Cola, and slandering's a bad way to put it because if we're going to talk journalism, it's illegal to slander. Let's just say I heavily disagree with Coke's use of high fructose corn syrup, which is actually true, I do. And that's my particular issue with them. Do you think it's very likely that Coke would continue to sponsor me if I was actually hurting their business, even if I was right? No. There's no rational reason for them to, right? Unless they were going to turn it into a PR stunt. So it's, again, there's a reason why people are very hesitant to trust these big websites, these games journalism, right? People are hesitant to trust such people because Kotaku has a particular history with either misrepresenting certain points or overrepresenting certain points. Gamergate. And certain things of that nature, right? Other websites have been accused of this. You have companies like Polygon have been raked over the coals because their journalists either seem to barely play any sort of game or play games to the equivalent level of a very old geriatric patient, which is actually insulting because I know some old people who will rip you guys up in Crash Bandicoot or like Tetris or even Europa Universalis. Old people will mess you up, right? Anyway, so that's kind of where a little bit of the I want to say confusion, but I would certainly say you have to understand that somebody in Jason's position, he in some way, shape, or form does benefit from these large corporations and companies. Obviously, his articles benefit. He could get potential scoops. He has connections in the industry, right? That's the way journalism works. You have contacts, people who are willing to tell you maybe things on the record when they shouldn't tell you. Or maybe people are willing to just give you a whole like expose and it's planned, but only you get it, so you get the scoop, so to say, right? There's a lot of incentive as a journalist to want to buddy up with a gaming company. It pays your bills, it gives you bigger scoops, it allows you to handle exclusives, which already differentiates you from other journalists. It allows you to get more exposure as well, because they could host you on their websites, they could link you somewhere, whatever else. They could use you on their broadcast team, these different types of things. You've seen different companies even hire content creators to make videos and hire journalists to make certain types of videos for them and ads and whatever else, right? So that kind of goes without saying, right? And people might ask, why haven't you, for example, done a sponsored video yet? And it's actually because of that. I've realized on this journey, this 2-year journey now, I started as an accidental content creator. And what I realized was that what I was doing was not as innocent and as hobbyist as I originally thought. It actually meant a lot more, right? Because journalism has always been interesting to me. But more so, telling stories has been interesting to me. Solving mysteries, right? That sort of thing. And there's a lot of mysteries in the world of gaming, and certainly a lot to tell and yet to tell. I kind of became an accidental journalist. And on the way, as you guys know of me, I've always been hesitant to assume such a title such as games journalism or games journalist, right? Games journalism, kind of a meme. And it has a bad rep to some extent. And other content creators on YouTube don't often consider themselves journalists. Now, there's, very obvious reasons for that. To be called a journalist, you kind of are held to a higher standard, right? Your words are taking a little bit more seriously. There's a little bit more weight behind somebody who's a journalist. Again, typically, I know people are going to have their reservations about journalism and how it's been in gaming so far, but certainly, largely, I would say that that's true. So I became this accidental journalist, right? What I realized through my journey so far is that just about any company is willing to give you money as long as you give them advertisement, right? A majority of companies are willing to do that, especially if you're popular, especially if your videos have a lot of views. So there's incentive for these companies to send you money and provide you with money and the free game so you'll cover their game, right? Now, the dangers of doing such a thing is that many of these companies will reach out to you with very little care of what your channel is or what your channel content is, right? So they don't care if your audience would like the game necessarily. They just want your clicks, basically. They want your audience. They want your numbers. They want your sales base, right? Your fan base. Some content creators in the past have done very questionable sponsored videos or sponsored content. For example, anybody who took a dime or was willing to do sponsored content for Bless Online, I question your integrity. That's certainly a polite way of saying it. There are certain games that even without playing, you just know something's a little bit off about them, right? When I get that 16th email that keeps telling me to pilfer or sell this game called Guardians of Ember, and yes, I'm putting you on blast because seriously, tell people to stop sending me emails about this damn game because I don't care about it. It's a shitty microtransaction-filled game. I would never advertise such a thing on my channel, and I would never, ever, first off, advertise anything which I wouldn't be able to have an open dialogue with the person that I'm advertising for, right? So we can actually know, are you expecting to buy my voice here? Because I will never sell my voice, meaning that just because you give me money doesn't mean I like you or have to like you, right? Which is why I've largely stayed away from doing sponsored videos and videos of that sort. There'll be more information about that later. Let's just get back into this video. When I say more information, I'm making a big announcement by the end of this month, maybe by the end of this month, but certainly by next month. That's going to kind of detail what the future of this channel is. And a big part of that is getting back to what we call actual journalism. That's going to be a big push for the channel. I've been shying away from it a lot, but there's a reason why I'm getting into discussions such as this today, and that's because this is what I should be doing, I think. This is what I should be doing. Send me those mails, I'll take their money. I trust YouTube creators more than Kotaku. Right, so I was just trying to provide a little bit of backstory so people kind of understand why the general public or the general population or gamer population is a little bit hesitant with people like Jason Schreier. What they do is they see this person as not being a gamer. And same thing with Polygon and Destructoid and these other companies. What I mean by not being a gamer is they accuse these people of essentially being writers or journalists first, gamers second, which actually does heavily impact the way you divulge content, create content or give out content. It does affect you in some way, shape, or form. Where you get your money from, let me say this slowly. Where you get your money from dictates what type of content you create, right? If some giant lobbyist company is paying your bills, you're probably pilfering, I keep saying pilfering. Is it piffering? What's the word where it's essentially you're selling bullshit, or you're selling out your ass? I can't remember. I can't remember exactly what the word is, but I'll stop using pilfering. Pilfering is to steal. I don't think it's piffering. Anyway, words haven't always been my strongest suit, as you guys know. I don't want to say selling out because it's like it certainly is useful, but anytime you want to know if somebody can be trusted or to what extent they can be trusted, you just see where their money comes from, right? So when you go look at a news organization, how does that news organization make money? Do they make money on clicks? Do they make money primarily on subscriptions? Do they make money from maybe other companies? Do they make money from maybe doing particular kinds of content, like reactionary content? You got to know where the money's going. And where the money is going is very important because it tells you what kind of source or how trustworthy somebody can be. Just because Jason has been involved with Kotaku, you know, a journalist company, or a news company that certainly doesn't have the best rap sheet in games journalism, it still very much is a serious company, a serious games journalist company or whatever else, agency, news agency, ad, whatever you want to call it. It's a serious entity. But that's almost the reason why people are so suspicious of Kotaku and companies like Kotaku. Because when you have writers first and foremost and journalists first and foremost who are also playing games, it almost seems like the criticism can be hand-waved in a lot of cases. And what I specifically mean, the easiest form of criticism you'll see these first name writer, second name gamer types of personalities or journalists, they'll say things about difficulty levels, right? The game's too hard. You saw a lot of people say that, for example, with like even Dark Souls. They'll often say things like buzzwords, like exciting, fast-paced, action, right? You've all seen these headlines. It's been around in the movies industry for ages and ages. They make a headline, the best game since sliced bread, or the most action-packed game since this, you know, for the century or for the decade or whatever, right? Journalists are making those headlines. That's what people don't realize. It's like, journalist is such a broad term. It literally is like, if we want to look up just what the definition is, right? We probably won't even scratch the surface of what it actually means. Person who collects, writes, or distributes news or other current information to the public. That means many different things, right? That could mean a sleuth of different things. But in this particular case, again, that is why people are a little bit hesitant and don't necessarily trust these big games journalist websites. They don't seem authentic, right? They don't seem authentically gamer. They seem to have an agenda, and their agenda seems to be, we don't really care about the ecosystem or games themselves. We just care about what's popular, what's selling, and what's the most like provocative story that we could possibly tell. So that's just me explaining, I guess, why games journalism is problematic in certain ways in that regard. The other side of the coin, from content creation perspective, like on YouTube and different platforms like Twitch, the problem arises there where at least there's some level of standard within Kotaku, right? We know that they have some level of standard they have to adhere to. And while we can certainly question credibility in certain regards, they've largely not done a terrible job, right, with journalism and telling stories and informing people. Where the content creator side can be problematic is now you have next to no standards. You have no ethics to reach or meet. You're not a company in the same way that Kotaku is. You can't be sued for libel. You can't be sued for slander. You can, but not as easily as you could be if you worked for a big corporation, right? There's a lot more consequences for somebody that works for Kotaku than there is for someone like me, who's a freelancer, right? Like, essentially, I get paid only right now off of either what you guys provide me or ad revenue. I haven't done any I haven't got any sponsored checks yet or anything like that, and nobody's paying me to shill anything yet. No, I'm just kidding. No one's paying me to shill anything. At least as far as I know. I did see someone saying that I was shilling WoW one time. I thought that was kind of funny. But let's just get started. I'm spending way too much time explaining the premise for you guys.
Prevalent this all was after Battlefront 2. They were kind of there in the back of my mind, like Metal Gear Solid 5 had like a bit of microtransactions here, and like Assassin's Creed 3 back in the day. I remember like some people complained about the microtransactions there, but I think once the Battlefront 2 debacle began, that's when it really started to pick up. And so I guess something a lot of people are wondering is, what is your stance? Where do you think one draws the line? Because there was that one moment when you talked about Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and you expressed adamantly that this is, in your perspective, blown out of proportion, that this is fine, that this is not intrusive, versus others who were saying this is kind of bullshit. So,
see, Yong establishes that Jason made an article that defended the microtransactions in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. So Yong is yet again establishing the narrative that, Jason, seems like you find yourself on the other side of the fence quite often. And by other side of the fence, I mean on the corporate fence.
On that front.
Yeah. So I think microtransactions are a very complicated topic, and I, just as a personal interest, am much more inclined to talk about how did we get here? Why are companies doing this? Why are we at this point where it feels like every single game has to have all these add-ons on top of the already pricey $60 entry point? That's in general what I prefer to talk about than just getting mad about the latest controversy.
Sure.
So Battlefront 2 is an interesting case. That was at the end.
Sorry,
of
this
the
guy
whole
particularly talks fast when I
getting mad
1.5 times him.
So Battlefront 2 is an interesting case. That feels like every single game has to have more inclined to talk about how did we get here? Why are companies doing this? Why are we at this point where it feels like every single game has to have all these add-ons on top of the already pricey $60 entry point? That's in general what I prefer to talk about than just getting mad about the latest controversy.
Sure.
So Battlefront 2 is an interesting case. That was at the end of a whole
Fair
lot
enough.
of microtransaction controversies last year, including Shadow of War, and I think there was some bad stuff with one of the racing games, forgetting which one. And some of those were egregious. I mean, Battlefront 2 was very clearly egregious.
Yes.
Just so people know, there's a lot more issues than the ones that he just brought up. I don't know if he's forgetting about the whole Battlefront problem. That was still spanning much into this year. I wouldn't say much, but certainly the beginning of the year. I think that was the end of last year, right? Not to mention, obviously, there's the more recent issues regarding microtransactions. For example, seeing NCSoft make essentially more than every other PC game that NCSoft made and continues to develop and to run makes less money than a game that's 20 years old, because now it has a mobile game. So it's like there's a lot more problems with microtransactions than just the Shadow of War thing. That one in particular was more so egregious because obviously it affected single player level of play, which, as far as I can tell, that's also the problem with the Assassin's Creed one, is that it affects single player game content, which, as Yong is likely probably bringing up to emphasize that will be an example of it being wrongly utilized, right? Or unfairly utilized. Whereas Jason responds by saying he's more interested in what it means overall in the marketplace, which is fair enough. But I think even just by mentioning those couple of like the one example he brought up, I think that downplays how problematic microtransactions have been so far. Not to mention that there's many other games that have had issues with them. Obviously, I'm more so educated in the realm of multiplayer games and MMO games, so of course I'm going to remember the games such as Rift, ArcAge, Black Desert Online, Revelation Online, Trove. What else off the top of my head? Or some big microtransaction flubs recently. Those are some pretty big ones. Oh, Lord of the Rings Online. People have gotten mad at that one recently as well. Really, I mean, there's ESO. ESO recently got into a lot of trouble too because of their shop, and more so because they were putting adware essentially into people's games because of their client. Point being is there are a lot of serious issues, especially issues regarding monetization, which is what that's for. Like, they're putting adware in there so they can track what you're doing with your data, so they can essentially monetize it, right? That's why people want your data. But anyway, it seemed a little bit dismissive, but let's continue to hear what he's saying.
last month, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and what you're probably referring to is a couple of tweets that I sent out where I talked about how I personally did not notice or mind the microtransactions,
Yes.
and I saw some articles and some YouTube videos about how Assassin's Creed Odyssey has this XP booster, and that ruins the game. And I've done a lot of thinking and talking about like that XP booster and its existence. Have you played the game? Have you played
Yes,
Assassin's Creed Odyssey?
I have.
Have you finished it or just played some of it?
I've not finished it, but I'm like more than halfway through, but eventually.
And
just
have you
figure it out.
noticed the XP booster at all?
I wish I would have the option to toggle it without it being paywalled. I will say that. I wish I could just, even if it's not, even if people are fine with the non-XP boosted version of the game, I do wish I had the option to enable that so I could maybe speed things along in certain sections of the game. Because, for example, I recently started playing Diablo 3 on Switch. What I love about that game is that it has multiple difficulty modes, each with their own sort of XP rate. So I started with the lowest difficulty, but the XP rate was slow, and I found the game too easy, and then I could just say, okay, I don't want that to happen anymore, so I could just go back to the main menu, switch back to expert mode or master mode, and I got like 200% XP, but also the enemies were much harder, and so I love that. And so in Odyssey, that was kind of stripped away, I felt. Not killed the game, but I wish I had that option for sure. The actual, I think, player choice, you know?
Yeah, so you felt like the level balance was off for you, and you wish you could have sped it up.
It's
You
bad
felt
in
like you were running
SWTOR
into
as well,
difficulty spikes.
Zula.
Yeah,
I would
especially
probably
towards,
say
sort of
SWTOR has
the
one of the
latter half
worst
the game. There, some might argue, unless I think you can do a
free-to-play
lot of side quests, like if you're
versions
clearing
of a
everything
game.
as you go along, you're probably not going to notice it. But there are people who kind of maybe
SWTOR
want to do the
is
story first and then maybe do some
borderline
side quests and play at their own
unplayable if
pace.
you don't
There are some
sub.
people out there, some crowds that I think will certainly have felt that.
So here's the problem. The problem with the XP booster is that the fact that it exists just creates that seed of doubt in our minds and makes us wonder, oh my God, was this difficulty scaling built so they could sell us this $10 package? And that I think is it's a more insidious problem than the fact that the game has microtransactions. The fact that it plants a seed of doubt in your mind, and the fact that it's such a different form of commodity than just exchanging money for something. It's not quite the same as buying an outfit, which also, I mean, not enough people are talking about how egregious it is that you have to spend like $750 for a unicorn skin. That's a whole other thing. But
is that earnable in game? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't think so. But the fact that you can pay for this thing that just affects the game in this intangible way, I think that is what really bothers people. And I get that. But I think it's also really important to know and to be honest about your perspective on things. And when I played the game, I felt like, oh my God, like this feels like one of those controversies that is just being turned into headlines because it is there. And that I think is interesting. And part of me felt like at the time, I mean, first of all, a lot of this, one of the problems.
Just so you guys know, when somebody says that's interesting, when they're making I guess like when they're having a response to something, like in the middle of them explaining something to you and they keep saying that's interesting. What I found, and this is a little bit of a human psychology here, it often means that he's being dismissive of it. Like a person is being dismissive. When you're like, that's interesting. Like there's a type of people who use interesting from the perspective of like, oh, that's really interesting. And then there's people who use interesting like, that's quite interesting, where you're kind of just like, yeah, that's kind of interesting. It seems like he's being dismissive when he says that, oh, because the XP meter was even in the game, period, he's wondering that that's so interesting that they don't complain about the other microtransactions, which they did, by the way. But anyway, that they're choosing to singly focus on the XP issue, as he said, is interesting. That just sounds, I don't know. That kind of interesting, like I said, it sounds very like dismissive. Like he doesn't really think it's a serious problem.
Here is that people just take tweets and assume that this is like they look at my Twitter feed and look at one of my tweets and say, oh my God, this is like this guy's chiseling his opinion in stone, as opposed to me just like writing a stray thought and putting it out there.
Right, that's a good point, Rippies. Rippies says that I don't think Rippies essentially is saying he doesn't think that Jason necessarily is worried about the microtransactions existing. He's only really caring about the amount of pay to win within something. So as long as it doesn't just negatively affect the game in terms of like being a thing that's taking advantage of somebody's ability to play a game, then it isn't necessarily wrong. But just so you guys know, XP is one of the easiest things for a developer to manipulate for a profit. And what I mean by that is, this was explained in my Visceral Games video. Dead Space, developed, of course, by Visceral Games and published by EA. Dead Space 2 or 3, I believe. It might have been 2 first, and then obviously 3 followed. But I believe 2 was the first single-player game that I can ever remember that had a microtransaction system that was essentially set up to where they purposely made the game grindy and made it even unfun to grind and maybe even difficult to grind in terms of like the weaponry, and lock the better weapon behind a paywall and the XP boosting behind a paywall. And it was very problematic in that game because the game largely has a lot of slow and boring bits, right? It's got a lot of slow and boring bits of the game where people start to feel like, damn, if I don't buy this XP boost, then I can't really have fun playing this game because it wants me to run around and kill monsters like pointlessly. And yes, just so people know, Dead Space 2 has some of these issues, but Dead Space 3 is like the problematic version of this system because of its, crappy multiplayer and crafting systems. And what do they call it? It's the cert? It's not the cert system. I can't remember exactly what they call it, but you need to pay something in order to have a certain type of outcome in regarding to crafting, if I remember correctly. Sort of kind of how Black Ops does it to some extent.
Get to that in a little bit because we're going to talk a little bit more about that in relation to Diablo Immortal.
Sure.
But with this,
so XP is a
it felt
serious
to me
issue.
like
you should be
something
worried
that
about
this
an
massive,
XP boost.
Incredible game that I was playing. My thought was, oh my god, like I don't even notice this XP booster. But I can totally understand why people feel like it's very present is irritating them. And I think we're at this point where video game publishers are trying to find more and more ways to get that extra revenue stream out of their games. And I think that going down that route is always going to be room for problems. It's always going to raise questions about like the way that the game.
That's a good point,
designed.
Zula.
But that to me,
I agree with
doesn't
you.
seem nearly as egregious as some of the other things.
I hope I didn't imply that
example.
he's somehow being manipulative. It's just more so he's not showing empathy. He's being flippant about a problem that actually is a problem, right?
Prioritization. There's no level of like, oh my god, this is really egregious versus this is okay, whatever. It's not that big a deal. And I think that we as a quote unquote video game community, for lack of a better term, need to like when we get this angry about everything, I think it creates this poisonous world where we are hurting a lot of people. And I think that gamer rage is a real problem.
Sorry, if these look like my suspicious eyes, they very much are my suspicious eyes. I'm sorry. That was real. That was like one of the craziest dog whistles I think I've ever heard. Like, did you guys hear that one? That one was like that one just like got me alert immediately. He says, there's too much hate, gamer rage is a real thing, and you're hurting people. Sorry, I'm trying to understand, like, in this case, right? Let's say we're having a discussion about whether or not single-player microtransactions in Assassin's Creed Odyssey is fair or not. I would say the vast majority of us would probably say if it ruins or affects gameplay inversely or negatively, it's not fair, right? But some people probably would at least be willing to purchase a skin that only affected your single-player play, even though even that can be disputed, right? Now, so that's a discussion, right? We're having that discussion about whether or not it's fair, whether or not it's a predatory business practice because it's taking advantage of pay to convenience, right? It's designing a metric as such as experience around a paywall of sorts. That's a real discussion we can have. Now, can you please tell me in this exact discussion, though, by bringing this up, who is getting hurt exactly? Like, I don't understand. Like, by pointing out that a company is or thinking, in Young's case, that a company is using unfair microtransactions, or let's say, like in his other arguments, is spreading themselves too thin. By saying those things, like, yes, he can misinform people, which is a point that I've already made. So I've already made that argument, which is the argument I think Jason should make. Is an actual sensical, logical argument, which is that you do need to be careful about the things that you say, and you certainly don't want to misinform people. But making it about like wanting people to like, oh, we don't want to hurt people. I don't really think that that's it, man. Like, I think that that's just like a talking point that you think is what people want to hear. or maybe it's the best one that you found that defends such a position. But I don't really understand what you mean by like being hurt. Okay, so Taj in chat is saying maybe he means the developers are being hurt, which is probably what he means, but okay. So when people harass somebody over when that whole Gamergate thing happened, the reason why it was so egregious to me was because obviously all of the politics that surrounded it, right? Was how people were reporting the story. It was so different, and certain developers were getting fired because of shit, like a drama was happening, all of that sort of stuff, right? I don't want people to get fired. Like when WildStar shut down, or is shutting down, I should say, and Carbine shut down, did I tell you guys I told you so? Just, rhetorical question, but feel free to answer it. But did I ever tell you guys like I told you so? Like, I didn't. Like, I was very solemn about it, and I was very respectable, and that's because it sucks that 150 people lost their job, right? When Tryon recently got bought out, and 200 people or 175 people lost their job and were laid off. Just because I don't like Tryon doesn't mean that I think that that's good or okay. Like, I still feel bad for those people, and it certainly can be helpful to your audience to say that, hey, like, these people lost their jobs. I made tons of videos about Telltale, and I've talked about Telltale for this reason, because I do think it's fucked up, for example, that a developer can be working his entire 4-year period on a game and then get dropped after the game doesn't do particularly well, and basically have no safety net, no recourse. Like he doesn't get his severance package, no healthcare, no, like, there's basically, he's just thrown back out there into the world and said, all right, start back over. That obviously is going to burn people out, and it burns developers out when they feel like they're just used like that, right? So I for sure don't think that you should ever, as I literally just mentioned like 20 minutes earlier, you don't want to just like levy a criticism at somebody that isn't founded, or you don't know yourself why you're criticizing them, right? So don't just parrot Fallout 76 sucks. Say Fallout 76 sucks because of X, Y, B, C, whatever, right? But I couldn't help but kind of face palming when he said the whole "you're hurting people" thing, because Blizzard. Okay, let me demonstrate something to you guys. Blizzard Activision is a company now that has upwards of $7 billion, right? And has $18 billion in assets, has $9.4 billion in equity, right? And has 9,000 employees. Do you think that people at this company are hurt, and I mean immorally hurt, when somebody says, I think Diablo Immortal is a cash grab? Do you think that they're morally like hurt? I mean, like mentally, physically, whatever definition you use to describe the word hurt. I would probably say not really, right? Not really. Like maybe someone who really likes Diablo Immortal and works on it is sad that people won't like it, right? Maybe they're sad that people don't like it the way that they like it for whatever reason. Or sad that people are just dismissive of it before even giving it a chance, right? Maybe they're sad about that. But like, what else are they sad about exactly? Is it the public perception or the consumer's fault that they misread the audience, or that they misread the market, or that they didn't respond in the way that was most favorable for their PR stunt? Like, no, like you don't blame the consumer whenever a publisher or a developer makes mistakes. And so when a publisher or developer makes a mistake or makes a blunder, or is starting to shift the market, for example, towards more microtransactions and more mobile games, why are you the least bit shocked when people are willing to rally against such a thing? Jim Sterling, for example, managed to make EA essentially eat crow in regards to Battlefront 2. I really think that Sterling was a big reason why. His article and his video rather was cited in many articles. You're talking like ESPN, you're talking Forbes, you're talking serious like websites were showing that Jim Sterling did bring EA temporarily for a little bit to its knees, right? Because of his ability to reach the audience and to inform the audience that this is not right. And everyone, all the gamers rose up, right? Gamers rise up. We all said, hey, we're not going to take this. And so we essentially made them kind of kill off one of their games, because I don't think Battlefront 2 will ever really recover after that level of PR, problems and whatever else. Not to mention, I don't think the game is really particularly that well, and I actually played it, despite just, not just like hearing what people said about it. I even streamed it, I think, at one point, briefly. Of course, it didn't take me long to realize, of course, it is a shit game, but point being is Activision Blizzard with $9 billion in assets or equity and $18 billion in assets, you're not hurting them, buddy. Like, I'm sorry, man. Who the fuck are you fooling? Like, you don't care about them being hurt because you can't even quantify how they are hurt. How are they hurt? In what way are they hurt? Financially? Well, when you make financial mistakes or blunders, you should lose money, right? That's just kind of how it works in a marketplace, right? You make a blunder, people don't like the decisions that you made, your stock lowers, right? That's how the stock market works. They don't believe that your potential to earn is as great as it once was because of your negative stigma around your company or whatever else, right? So that's just interesting. Now, obviously, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and be willing to watch the rest of this, but you always have to be careful with people who are they're willing to dog whistle on something that I don't think that you can really quite quantify. We can explain how much Blizzard profits off of loot boxes. We know that, right? There's a figure out there. There's also one for EA, right? FIFA Team, for example, makes billions of dollars. These figures out there exist. We know how much money they make from these industries. We know how these industries operate, right? We know they're not entirely fair, and they certainly are a little bit scummy, especially in regards to like FIFA and these other games that, are, basically casino lots. Like it's all about putting money into the game in order to create your team. UFC did the same thing with their game recently. They have this ultimate team or ultimate fight team or whatever they call it, where you get these power-ups, and guess what? These power-ups are microtransactions as well. And sure, you can get them through earning them, but as obviously the point of such a model is, they incentivize you by every turn or at every turn to buy something in the store. So it's just a bit weird when you see someone talk about a company such as Activision Blizzard being hurt. It's like the only thing that's really going to hurt that company, because again, it's a corporation. It's not a single person. It's not 5 people. It's not 5 developers. It's not, a single office. It's not a floor. It's multiple buildings. It's thousands of people. It's billions of dollars, right? It's a huge corporation of a bunch of different people. At the end of the day, the only thing that affects them is their bottom line. That's the only thing that really, really can affect them. And what hurts their bottom line, of course, is public perception. It's getting outed, right? Getting backlash from the community, from certain content creators. It's getting sanctions placed on them because of immoral business practices. It's having court cases. It's having all of these other sort of things happen. That's the only way that really forces this corporation to care, because it affects their bottom line, right? People asked, why did Disney decide to spank Electronic Arts after Battlefront 2? Because it's going to hurt their bottom line. Like, they can't afford a Star Wars game to be in the negative presses like that. No, Disney's like, this is our IP, our billion dollar IP. Sorry, EA, you're going to get spanked, and we're going to make it public.
And I think a lot of that is caused as a result of not being able to prioritize and not being able to see the difference between something like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where it's like, okay, this XP booster plants this idea in my mind. It's kind of annoying. I hate that it even exists, which I totally agree with that. Versus Battlefront 2, where you have to pay more if you want to get good at the multiplayer, at least before they removed all the microtransactions. Point being, I think that it's really important to see the levels in this and to not just treat everything as if it is quote unquote cancerous, as if it is exploitative. And that's the things that I was saying on Twitter.
It's a good argument.
That I think when you
it's
are
a fair
screaming,
argument.
when people are screaming, not necessarily, I'm not going to name names here, but I think when there's this world when we're just shrieking constantly about everything, I think it just creates this poisonous discourse. It leads to just lots of toxicity. It leads to game developers burning out. It leads to hardcore game players just not
that
wanting to be involved anymore.
That right there, that argument is quite possibly one of the worst arguments you can make. And hear me out. You are essentially making an argument that none of us can confirm, right? Like, unless you have intimate knowledge of developers and companies and specific developers, you don't necessarily know the stress or pain that they go through, right? But what if I told you it actually doesn't matter from a consumer perspective if the person providing you a product is sad because you didn't like the product? What if I told you as a consumer, it actually, from an empathetic perspective, I don't want people to be blasted and treated unfairly. But as a consumer, why does it matter to you if a developer is sad? Right? Like, it matters if it hurts their ability to make the game. But it rarely will, right? Unless obviously they have some level of like depression or something serious, some serious mental issue. But what I'm saying is, like, the developers working on Diablo Immortal, they're still working on the game. They're gonna do just fine, right? They're getting paid. They're working on the game. They're doing their job. It's not the consumer's worry to think about how developers are responding to mistakes that they're making. That's the thing, is like, if I agree with Jason in saying that microtransactions shouldn't all be labeled with the same brush, which is essentially what I was saying earlier, and is the same point that I've made in regards to free-to-play, but you also have to make the concession that free-to-play inherently is easier to exploit, which is why microtransactions are so problematic. Not to mention there's next to no regulation about loot boxes and gambling, internet gambling and stuff. I mean, Valve didn't lose court cases after basically allowing gambling, but because it's not actually for a monetary value, it doesn't count, right? That's a big problem. Of course, everyone will talk about Blizzard, as I mentioned. They'll talk about EA with FIFA. Obviously, these are companies who are doing it what's called wrong. And when I say wrong, I mean wrong as in it's not morally right or ethically right and not fair to the consumer, which ultimately is what's most important, right? Is the consumer. There's that famous saying, which is, I can't like stand by obviously completely. I hate the saying, but there's this saying that the customer is never wrong. And it's right from one particular aspect. The customer is never wrong when it comes to when they put their dollars on the line, right? If I put my money on the line, I am not wrong anymore, right? Now you have to actually take me serious because I'm one of your customers. So you have to be willing to listen to me even if I'm a little bit unreasonable, right? To a certain extent, right? The customer, though, doesn't have any allegiance to the actual company itself. Now, sure, people form allegiances and people have favorite companies. Look at BioWare, it was a favorite company for a long time. But that stuff's fleeting once you start to get into the corporate world, right? The companies we're talking about are at the corporate level, right? So we don't have personal relationships with these developers anymore. In fact, many of us can't even name major developers at these companies anymore. Or shit, I would even say like majority of us can't name the entry workers, period, right? So what I'm saying is that as a consumer, the only thing we know is how much money we have, how much money we're willing to spend, what we like, and what we want to buy, which is obviously ultimately tied together. And so once we make the choice, say for example, to purchase a game, and we see that the game has some sort of XP bar that can be affected by a microtransaction, it already puts people at at an uneasy state because they're looking at it as, well, I didn't ask for this. I don't want this. I don't want to spend money on this thing. So therefore, I am not happy with this feature, right? And if you even further educate that opinion with, I think that this is problematic because it basically incentivizes the company to create a pay to convenience, right? Maybe you had a more nuanced argument. The point is that from both of those perspectives, they're not thinking about, are the developers going to get mad or sad because of this negative? No, they're just simply thinking about whatever their needs are. So yeah, it's a little bit selfish, but that's what they're thinking about. Now, for people such as myself, such as Jason, such as Yong, obviously we also think about the companies. We're thinking about why they're doing things. We're thinking about what we can do in response to certain things that companies are doing. But ultimately, it's our job to inform the public and inform them why things are good or why things are bad. I would argue that there's very little utility in a journalist primarily focusing on telling people that companies aren't that bad. I say primarily. It doesn't really serve the journalist because ultimately he's answering to the people, right? The majority of journalists are answering to the people. So from Young's perspective, he's the journalist of the people. But Jason, on the other hand, you have to understand he works for Kotaku. And he also works on these major games, content for these major games. This sort of means that he's working for Kotaku. He's not working for the people. Do you understand what I'm saying? Kotaku pays his bills. Who pays Kotaku's bills? Probably their advertisers. Probably, right? Probably the people who are willing to do sponsored content for them or put content that's sponsored on there, like click links and ad clicks and videos and whatever else, right? So it's easy to see why Jason is quick to defend the developer perspective because he probably feels more closer aligned to developers as he works more closely related with them than he would the general public. This is why people don't like games journalism, because the games journalist in this case doesn't really seem like he's thinking about the people. He's thinking about more so the market and how it affects companies. While that's helpful, it certainly gives people the wrong idea that maybe, for example, he's not as objective as he seems. Maybe he's more biased, or maybe he's kind of, to use simple terms, he's bought off. Like from Yong's perspective, though, Yong would likely never make an argument that would support a company over the general public because it doesn't suit his audience. It doesn't suit what he stands for, right? I think those are important distinctions to make between the two of them, right?
It leads
exactly. You don't bite the hand that feeds you.
Seriously, when there are real problems, it just causes a lot of problems. Go ahead.
The notion that the thing is, people understand that Battlefront 2 is far worse than Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It's just that I don't think that necessarily excuses what Assassin's Creed Odyssey is doing with the XP boosters. And I guess part of it is that different people have different criteria for what they deem acceptable.
Right. It's true.
Like for example, I think if something is...
And just so you guys know, we do a poor job as a community of explaining what is acceptable. And that's kind of where the job of you guys as the community and journalists, like me or Jason or Yong, we're able to let people know, right? Like, at least that's what we're supposed to do. But exactly, as Limpos says, the problem with someone... These guys are literally on polar opposites of the spectrum. You guys realize that, right? If I could pull a graphic up on screen right now, and I was some, wizard of what is this thing called again? OBS. If I was some wizard of OBS, I could probably pull up an animation that shows the dark versus the light. But in a funny way, this is like, and again, not saying morally, okay? Just hear my analogy out. Jason represents the dark side. Means to an end. You gotta do what you gotta do. Companies gotta make money. Companies gotta do what they gotta do. Yong makes up the perspective of the people, right? We must band together. We must unite. Harmony, right? Light side Jedi versus the dark side Jedi. They both have good points in certain regards, and obviously have problematic or flaws or or glaring weaknesses of sorts. And it's because I think this is so interesting because they're essentially polar opposites, right? One is the voice of the people, but he's almost, as Limpos says, too much the voice of the people, to the point to where he's kind of the slave of his audience, where he's rarely, if ever, going to go against his audience. And feel free, anybody, to confirm this. Go look at any one of his videos, and you can look on Social Blade, and it'll tell you typically what's the most disliked video. I would probably wager it's not very high, which generally means you're not doing enough to anger people, right? You're not being controversial enough. Whereas Jason, on the other hand, obviously doesn't suffer the least from being controversial. So it's interesting. They come from these completely different places. Obviously, where Jason's problems align with is that people start to think maybe you just care more about the system than you actually care about the people in the system, right? Which is kind of basically what the Dark Side Jedi does, to use a Star Wars reference. The Sith don't really care about the people, they care about the system, right? The system has to work because it has to work. The Empire did nothing wrong. I'm just kidding. But and then Young's perspective, he's like, I'm the rebellion. Like, we have to go against the system because that's what we do as consumers, right?
Cosmetics, no random chance that you can just purchase directly. If it's reasonably priced and reasonably allowed to obtain via gameplay. And it also helps if it's free to play versus single player, but mainly that first three criteria, I think then people kind of overlook it. Like Fortnite, not a lot of people are talking about how egregious Fortnite is. There's some segments who say, I think some of the skins are overpriced. But there is the system where you get the battle pass. You can sort of, if you play a lot of the game, you can earn all of it and earn enough currency to buy the next battle pass. And so it encourages gameplay where you play and you earn the rewards. Whereas with Assassin's Creed Odyssey, it affects gameplay, but there's no way to earn that via gameplay. It's just something that's paywalled for an additional $10 for a feature that some might desire. Even if you don't, per se, that doesn't mean that there aren't people who do desire that, who think that the game would be better off with that XP booster activated. And I don't think them expressing anger over that necessarily is unjustified or is
okay.
And so
Pretty simple point, right?
So many of the things, like if you look back, I don't know how long you have been following the video game industry, but if you look back even 8 years ago, 10 years ago, at the types of games that were being released for the same exact price, it is like beyond belief how much better this is in every way, quantity and quality, right? And so we're at this point where it's hard for me to accept that there should be rage about these things. Like, okay, you want to get annoyed that
okay, so that's actually wrong.
it is like beyond belief how much better this is in every way, quantity and quality, right? And so
Let's listen to his
general,
point.
I'm just saying in general. I'm not saying I know there's some series that are in the shitter. I'm not arguing that point. But I'm saying in general, right now, if you go into Steam, the number of games you can play. I mean, everyone's always talking about their backlogs, their Steam backlogs. And right now, I mean, I just finished Red Dead Redemption 2, which is absurd.
Yeah, of course.
And now I'm moving on to Return of the Obra Dinn and Hitman 2 and all these other games that I want to play. We're at this point where video games are in an incredible place.
The fidelity is amazing.
Their graphical fidelity, they're hitting all these artistic bars. Yet at the same time, there's so much rage. And to me, it's like looking at a game like Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It's $60. For $60, you are getting so much more and so much a better game than so many of the things. Like if you look back, I don't know how long you have been following the video game industry, but if you look back even 8 years ago, 10 years ago, at the types of games that were being released for the same exact price, it is like beyond belief how much better this is in every way, quantity.
Yeah, I don't think he understands this argument. Maybe it's a little bit too nuanced for him, but for those who maybe aren't picking up on the point here, I will point you to a Super Bunny Hop video on this topic. Where he essentially talks about, are video game prices increasing? Let me find this one, where it is. I'm sure someone in chat has seen it. Okay. Here's a good video for those who haven't seen it. But it's essentially a video by Super Bunny Hop where he talks about how American game companies avoid paying income tax. I think he has multiple topics on this, but he talks about at numerous times that many of these large companies are finding multiple loopholes as to not actually have to pay nearly as much money as you actually think they are paying. So when they announce like $100 million budget, $200 million budget, we don't exactly know where that money is going exactly. Not to mention that the majority of that money probably is spent on advertisement. And just so you guys know, I make that claim based on statistics, for example, from the perspective of WoW, right? WoW actually the game itself only took about 40 to 50 million to develop, right? But you've probably never heard that number before, and that's because the number is astronomically higher once you consider server costs, advertisement, and all of the other stuff that they did post-launch. That number is probably closer to, I think they said after the first 3 or 4 years of development for WoW, it's about a couple hundred million. So that kind of shows you like the game itself might only be 50 million, 20 million, 10 million, but in order for this company at least to feel like it can be competitive, it feels like it needs to do all of these different things in order to be competitive, right?
Shooting people, cracking wise, and pretending to know how to fight with my hands.
Hey, what's up, Ion? Thanks for the sub. Welcome back. Sub hype, that is for sure. Yes. Many companies use loopholes. So to be specific, the thing that Jason is saying here that's not actually true is that he's saying that we're so lucky that games these days are the same price, and we're getting all of this content from it, and they're the same price as they used to be, when actually, in many cases, game development is actually getting cheaper, right? The actual development aspect is getting cheaper. What isn't cheap is, the marketing budgets that these companies are throwing at games. Like with Visceral Games, Dead Space wasn't successful as a franchise ultimately, like financially speaking, not because it's a bad game. The game series has sold multi-million copies rather. It's sold, I think, $4 to $5, $6 million. You combine it all, it might even have broken double digits. The reason why that game didn't do particularly well, as described by Visceral and EA themselves, is essentially they put way too much money in it to sell it to where they didn't really get the return on the investment that they wanted, especially when you compare it to a game as a service, or obviously a game with a lot more microtransactions or ability for microtransactions.
And quality, right? And so we're at this point where it's hard for me to accept that there should be rage about these things. Like, okay, you want to get annoyed that this game is an XP booster, fine. You want to get annoyed that this game has this annoying microtransaction and it's just like should not be there. It ruins.
It's a good point, Mordo.
I am with you there 100%. But
the numbers don't add up a lot of the time. It makes you realize these developers and publishers want us to think that the game is the most expensive part because that's the part we're paying for. But the truth is, and this has been proven in many different statistics, including the one that I just mentioned about WoW, it's all of the other things that cost the money, right? There's a joke about SWTOR, and I'm sure you guys have heard this joke many times. The joke about SWTOR is that the game, after launch, cost 200 million, maybe a little bit more to develop, right? The joke is that 100 of that million was the voice acting. Now, it's kind of a joke, but I can tell you from inside information. I'm just from being inside of various testing, and also just being in conversations with people such as Daniel Erickson and other people involved in the company. I've kind of determined that the voice acting probably was the most expensive part of SWTOR, right? And that's kind of what in the end ends up pissing a lot of people off, especially not to mention the majority of people who played the game. And I say this just taking from what BioWare says themselves, the majority of people who do play the game just spam spacebar. so the 100 million that they spent on the voice acting. Yeah. Point being is a lot of these companies want us to think that they're spending, godly amounts of money on things when all of that money is for offices to run. It's licensing fees, it's for server infrastructure, it's for management, it's for tax breaks, as we're finding out, right? These various forms of tax breaks, potentially companies pocketing, millions or whatever else, right? We have no clue of to what extent. We just know, as Super Bunny Hop points out in his video, that it's happening, right? And we already knew that to some extent. But these companies, for those who didn't watch the video, essentially set up shell companies in other countries, obviously. And this is becoming more problematic for companies such as Blizzard and EA, who, worldwide operate with microtransactions and specifically loot boxes, which obviously have recently gotten into the crossfire with regards to certain countries, more specifically like Belgium, France, and they're the ones that jump out at the top of my head. Have taken issue with obviously the business practices behind loot boxes and whatever else. and EA is ready to fight them head to head because they basically don't have a choice. Otherwise, it could be a potential cascading effect of sorts. But another thing that needs to be mentioned, and I think this actually kind of, in a lot of ways, eviscerates like Jason's main point, which is that you should be careful about the developers, people are hurting, like that sort of thing. The main point is like, if EA launched Battlefront 2 and Jim Sterling and Young and whoever else, whatever other content creator didn't say this is wrong, this is unfair, this is unjust, if all of the population didn't vote with their dollars and stop buying the game and stop buying loot crates and bang that drum, if they weren't willing to go through all of that, do you guys think that they ever would have had to change their business model? Why would they? It's kind of like people ask, oh, these different Asian MMOs that launch in America or in the Western audience, they launch with these unfair business practices. Well, it's like, those unfair business practices are more so unfair because they're unfair in America or the Western world, but they're largely considered fair in Korea, or at least accepted primarily, even if it maybe isn't necessarily like seen as fair, right? But point being that without those people to say that this is wrong and be loud about it, EA would have never had to change anything. Maybe the investigations into these loot boxes, maybe that doesn't start as soon as it did start, right? Maybe the whole recent push towards saying fuck microtransactions, especially in single player games, maybe without games and content creators reacting to Shadow of War, for example, maybe that doesn't happen. You see what I'm saying? You need an event that pisses people off greatly enough to where people rise up rather, and say, this is enough, we've had enough. That's the only way you can bring the company to their knees, is if you can affect their bottom line. So it's just like, again, it makes sense coming from this guy, because I've already described, you know, again, where his criticism is going to be coming from. It's coming from a different place than Young's is, the complete opposite place. You have to remember that at the end of the day, without people being toxic, you know, aka just bringing up issues, nothing will get done, right? These things won't get fixed. While that doesn't mean that we should allow people to hate train, to bandwagon, or, as I've mentioned multiple times, blindly hate things, that's just another problem altogether, to be honest. But I'll see if there's anything more redeeming in this. I'll maybe try and skip around a little bit. I'm not going to sit through this whole thing. Just the interesting bits. After this, I think I'm honestly probably going to end the podcast. I don't think we had many people come on today. You guys have mainly been listening to me rant and showcase PvP. This is exclusive journalist versus journalist PvP.
Screaming at developers and just getting upset about every new controversy week after week. I think that is where you hit a point where, I mean, for me, it's incomprehensible.
But here's the thing.
You have to, though. Again, although he thinks he's making a grand point, you have to have outrage, because that's the only way that something will happen or change. So even if it can be misguided in certain ways, ultimately, I would argue that it's better, right? Here's what I mean. What if we could objectively say that the criticisms surrounding Fallout 76 weren't entirely merit-based, right? Maybe they actually weren't merited. Maybe much of it was over-exaggerated. Or not say, I won't say much, but let's say some of it was over-exaggerated. Let's say 30% of the criticism was over-exaggerated. 70% of the other criticism, right, is still significant. And it's still significant enough to be a problem. So regardless of if like it isn't that big of an issue in the long run, my point is that the only way in order for the market to respond is to be outraged. If everyone takes the time to only make super long, drawn out, explanatory, you know, analytical type videos, first off, we probably wouldn't be as effective at getting news at the same speed that we get it now. You can get everything on Reddit, you can get everything on Twitter, and now YouTube has people like Yong Yea, for example, who essentially are dropping news as it happens. and even giving you a little bit of like their opinion on it, right? The point is that even if a little bit of it is misguided, ultimately, I would argue that it's like Revan would say, it's for the greater good, right? It's for the greater good. Yeah, I'm sure a couple developers might have gotten harassed more than they should have. That's wrong. And certainly, people are just bandwagon hating Fallout 76. I couldn't tell you how many people are because I don't know the statistics, but I would certainly say it's probably not a majority, but a significant amount. That being said, even if they're misguided in certain ways, it's based on a good premise, right? It's based on good critique. That's the thing, is as long as it's based on a good critique and a good question, whether or not something is fair, I think the outrage in the end isn't really that consequential. I think it's actually better because, once again, if we can somehow bring a big corporation to their knees to force them to stop doing, predatory business practices, if it takes outrage to get there, I think it's worth it.
How do you change a circumstance like Battlefront 2 without an outrage? I mean, do you think that EA would have
loot crates and Farming Simulator,
which has no loot boxes, or Anthem, which they say will have no loot boxes? FIFA still does, but would you say that backpedaling would have happened without some sort of outcry?
I think that is, I think there are times when it is justified to go out and be like, you know what, I'm going to start this consumer movement together. I think the Xbox DRM was a very good example of a way that a group of people who are really upset and want to stop something can get together and do that. But even then, it was like with Battlefront 2, the level of discourse that I saw, it's just like it goes beyond like, here, I am a passionate person and I am really against this, and it just goes into, I mean, I've looked at your YouTube comments, like it's the level of discourse that you have is different than the anger and rage and outrage and just toxicity that I'm seeing expressed by people. And I think that is a real problem. And I think people like you and me with a platform, I think one of our responsibilities, because we speak to these big audiences, is to say, hey, like maybe you don't need to be so angry. Maybe that anger is not really healthy for anybody. And for me personally, and we will probably get into this, but something that I find really concerning, I am someone who really deeply cares about video games.
Okay, If the crux of Jason's argument was simply that, Yong, you needed to do a better job of informing your audience, and when you make statements such as this game is being, or this company is being spread thin, you should actually be forced to like explain them and provide evidence to make such a claim, right? If that was Jason's point, which is essentially what my criticism is of Yong, if that was his criticism, I think that they would basically kind of agree in the end and they could just move on. But I think it actually really isn't the main crux of his criticism. It seems like the main crux of his criticism is like almost like a feelings-based argument. It's almost like because people are so hateful about an actual good thing happening, say for example, like abolishing a microtransaction, or a reaction to wanting to abolish such a thing, that somehow that anger, the gamer rage, is so toxic it's going to like destroy gaming or negatively impact gaming. And I'm just sorry, like, while I think it certainly makes us one of the more toxic communities out there, and I think we can safely say that gamers probably are a lot more critical than most, especially of games, more so recently, don't you guys think that we have a fucking good reason to be that way? Just speaking as a consumer here, don't we have a good reason to be tired of being led to the fucking slaughter? Don't you think we're tired of being lied to, of being misrepresented, of having games that are essentially ruined, right? Of taking IPs and trying to cash in on nostalgia, of trying to cash in on vanilla server gimmicks and such. These are all sorts of things that have been happening. Selling microtransactions that benefit your progression in single player games, day one DLCs, 45 gigabyte patches, day one patches, day one character DLCs like in Soul Blade. Soul Calibur. Here am I calling it its old name, Soul Blade or Soul Edge. But right, these are all things that are real issues. And shit, us guys, sorry girls, guys as in girls and guys, but us as the consumer base, we know even more because we're MMO fans, all of us. Like, if you're watching my videos, you're probably an MMO fan. We're MMO fans, right? We know more than anybody else in this marketplace of gaming that if you're not careful, these publishers and these developers will not only rake you over the coals, they'll pocket your wallet while you're burning in agony, right? They see you burning in a lava, pit or something like that, right? As long as they get that wallet out of there, it's all good, right? It's all about trying to maximize the amount of money that they can make. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that corporations are evil and it's all the system is out to get. Doesn't mean any of that. I'm not saying to be an anarchist or to somehow say that just because they have an ROI or are searching an ROI that they're a bad person, right? Companies do things that help them monetarily that also help people, right? Donating to charities, doing charity work, that sort of thing. But I think we have a pretty good reason as gamers to be kind of fed up, right? Don't we have a really good reason to kind of be like, really? Is enough enough? Really? I think we have a pretty good case for that. So I would say that the gamer rage, while it certainly can be misguided, and that's just human nature, by the way. People just get angry at shit and don't even know why, and which is one thing I always obviously stress to people is to know why you're angry. But I think largely this gamer rage or whatever else is more so appropriate. It's an appropriate response to a market that's essentially in a stage right now where it's very much trying to figure out what is wrong, what is right, what is acceptable, right? And companies are continuing to push the limits of this because they want to see how much they can get away with, right? How much more money can they make? Games as a service is specifically a reaction to this. How can we keep selling the same game over and over again, right? Keep releasing content patches, right? What about if we did season passes? And you can get the DLC on discount. What if we give you more pre-order bonuses? What if we allow you to have a new game plus? What if we allow you to have skins in single player? What if we allow you to have a better XP boost if you don't want to have to actually grind, right? These are all certain things that publishers and developers are incentivized to do because ultimately they want to find a way to get to your pocketbook. And so I think, once again, to explain my thoughts, it's perfectly reasonable for us as gamers to be kind of fed up about this whole thing, right?
I really want
just a little bit more, and I think I'm going to finish, guys.
I'm also someone who talks to a lot of people who make video games. That's not corporations. That is not the corporate shill conversation.
Right? Yeah. I'm not subscribing to that either.
Well, but I want to get into that. But I talk to a lot of people who make video games, right? And the most common thing I hear from people who make video games is the sense of like,
wish this was timestamped,
just resounding apathy and burnout, and just the sense that like people just want to leave the video game industry. And that's not entirely because of this outrage thing, but outrage is certainly a factor. I mean, there are other reasons, layoffs and.
Ooh, look at Twitter and how Jason is portraying this whole conversation. The plot thickens. Boy.
But the
scratch your nails to the microphone? Why? He should unzip the sweater a little bit and start scratching the microphone and crinkling paper. Okay. Let's see. Oh, wow. Interesting. In response to his own posting of the video, he says, most of the comments on this video are anti-Semitic, alt-right shitbags, which I hope Yong Yea thinks long and hard about. That's an implication that he is an alt-right or an anti-Semitic. Just so you guys know that is a pretty serious fucking allegation. To say for a journalist to say such a thing, that's pretty incendiary, right? To make a claim that this person somehow doesn't like Jewish people or is racist. That's what an alt-right member essentially is, right? It's an ethno-nationalist typically. It's a racist person. Also often listed as a Nazi, right? Oh man, why does this guy have to make everything worse? He actually wasn't even like, he had a couple things that I disagreed with, but I certainly, I think he virtue signaled a little bit too hard here again, and The dog whistle went off. Anyway, he posts some stupid YouTube comment, which I won't even show you guys what this comment says, because I can do the exact same thing. I can go here to my video, and I do this sometimes, and Lempos hates when I do it, but I can come to a video of mine. I can click on my video, scroll down here, and top comments are generally going to be ones that are pretty agreeable, right? People will generally agree. But when I press newest first, now you're going to start to see these comments, and you're going to be like, wait a minute. Now we're getting into dumb territory. Now I know why people say the YouTube comments are so stupid, or YouTube comments are horrible, right? Let's see if I can find one. I'm literally just scrolling to show you kind of how you can color a bias and also paint a certain narrative, right? All right. Everyone keeps calling the game gorgeous, but it looks ugly to me. Characters, monsters, building, etc. have that trashy weeb aesthetics, make my eyes bleed, right? I could probably take this comment, post it, show it to everybody, and be like, see, everyone just hates weebs. Don't you see? Everyone hates weebs. Meanwhile, it's like the first post I saw someone even mentioning weeb in some time, right? Point is that you can pull any comment off of any video and it can make it look bad or seem negative. To then take that comment and extrapolate that, oh, that means that your audience is stupid and also anti-Semitic. And just so you guys know, the only thing anti-Semitic or alt-right or whatever else about the comment in question, which I don't even want to read the whole thing because it's so silly, is just that he says, the soy is strong in this one. Don't mix politics with games. That's the comment that okay. The soy is strong in this one, okay? That's a bit of a, liberalist slight, right? He's kind of like insulting him, but he's also kind of assaulting his manhood. Maybe he thinks he sounds feminine or is acting, whatever, shifty or whatever this guy's case is. I don't know what his case is, right? It's a stupid thing. Look, the soy meme is stupid, okay? Not to mention, have you guys ever drank Soylent? It's actually pretty good. Anyway, soy, yeah. We get it. It's funny. It's like, haha, soy, you're so, weak and stuff. Okay, I get it, right? But saying don't mix politics with games, first off, it's a fair statement to make. I think it's a fair statement to make. I don't really see how this guy is being anti-Semitic, though, or alt-right. Not really sure where he got that from. And I mean, we obviously can read through these comments ourselves. So why don't we just scroll? Hypocritical, self-excusing behavior. I wonder if because the comments were critical of him is why he's taking it in this way. Do you guys think that it's possible that he, for example, isn't ready or able to listen to criticism? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but in my comments, the majority of the time is me apologizing to people, me telling people that they are idiots, or me making a concession and pinning my comment because I realized that I either made a mistake or didn't fully explain something. Majority of my videos are this way, right? I have many people who are very positively critical of me, who give me very, very positive criticism. And what that means is that it doesn't mean that they believe in me or support what I say necessarily. It just means that their criticism, whether or not they agree or disagree with me, is good criticism, right? It's like positive criticism. There are, where that is though, there's like 1,000 more shit comments, right? So looking at your YouTube audience, it isn't necessarily indicative of everything per se. I will say that you certainly do need to think about your audience to some extent. But it doesn't really mean much because in Yong Yea's case, he's a generalist YouTuber, right? He handles general topics. Whatever is the most popular and current topic is the one that he's going to cover, which inherently means that his audience, by definition, is probably one of the most diverse, right? Makes sense? Makes general content, general audience, aka diverse, a bunch of different types of people. Maybe one of his members of his audience is an alt-right member. Maybe one hates Jewish people. But maybe, like we've seen in these top comments, some are still actually trying to be quite rational and explain why they don't agree with this guy. Right? Many people are taking the time to explain their perspectives and see why they don't agree with this guy. Instead of him taking that and being like, maybe I was a bit wrong or misguided in certain ways, he just immediately goes to, most of the comments are anti-Semitic and alt-right shitbags. I hope you think long and hard about this one, mister. I don't know about you, but anybody who says thinks long and hard sounds like somebody who's like disciplining their child. Have you guys ever heard that? Go sit in timeout, and you better think long and hard, mister, about what you did wrong today. It's like, what? It's such a leap. You see a video where it's just like constant criticism, right? And you're not even willing to even just understand the criticism, right? Like, I don't get that. Like, even on the top comments of my videos, you can find people that disagree with me, right? Let's see. That's actually a good comment. Let me like that guy. Forgot about that one. Okay, here's a guy that kind of doesn't necessarily disagree with me, but he brings up a good point, right? He's like, what killed Ion for me was zero interaction on the developers and publishers' part. Now, if I'm, I guess, Jason in this case, I might read this and think, you disagree with me? Huh. Let me run through this really quickly. And I'm going to show everybody that every comment in here is so mean. See? This guy said, weebs suck. It's like the argument when people tell me, but this one MMO server is so populated. And it's like, is it? Okay. Did you know that this one server used to be 20 servers? Or 10 servers? Or 5 servers? 3 servers? Now imagine the water that's poured into this cup poured into 5 other servers, right? That's how the game used to be before it merged. This is a concept I tried to explain to people in SWTOR, who, when I made my video on SWTOR, people were saying, oh, you're just doing this because of the recent server like mergers. It doesn't actually mean the game's dying. The game's perfect. Have you loaded in? So many players. It's like, yeah, it's like you combine 8 servers into one cup, essentially one server. That water's overflowing, right? It's overflowing. When you look at all the idiotic comments, I can create the narrative that it's overflowing. Negative comments are everywhere. Look at it. But look, I'll be honest. The majority of the comments that I get are pretty neutral, right? It's just like, oh, cool. I liked Ion. Awesome. I like MMOs, right? They're pretty general. And not to mention, many of you are quite, not pensive, but I would say like you're good at explaining when you disagree.
The outrage, I think, is very real and is a very real.
What do you think? What's the straw man? Sorry, just out of curiosity, because I was memeing a little bit, maybe being even a little bit dismissive, but I'm basically just listening to what this person's saying and then reading what they're saying and just interpreting it in the way that I'm interpreting it. And for example, in this case, he's literally doing a fallacy that I will tell you guys about today, which is called confirmation bias, right? Confirmation bias, also confirmatory bias, is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, or recall information in a way that confirms one's pre-existing belief or hypothesis. It's the type of cognitive bias and systematic error of inductive reasoning, right? So in this case, I demonstrated that Jason did indeed participate in what's called a confirmation bias, right? After having a video that's an hour and 23 minutes long, he seriously had the gumption to make a post that dismissed the criticism that he was getting, chalking it up to, well, alt-right and anti-Semitism. Check out these comments, boys. When any of us can go pick up this video, like we can click on this video whenever we want, right? And we can read through comments. And I can come away with the same exact confirmation bias that he does if I only read certain types of comments, right? That's the point. The point is that where is his response to this criticism, for example? He believes he's justified to have moments of anger on Twitter, but no one else is? Because they're toxic and entitled? How very immature. He calls gamer rage a problem, but then ignores reality that his workplace and career is about stoking outrage and controversies to get clicks. I mean, is this person saying anything that seems like unfair so far? If anything, this has only cemented my view that Kotaku, Polygon, and their ilk aren't worthy of our attention. And of course, he's already back to Twitter to calling Yong Yea's viewers anti-Semitic, alt-right shitbags. I mean, I don't think it's like a straw man to point out that he's making a fallacious argument. And he's doing it because he's sensitive and he's essentially butthurt that he had a negative response. I think, if anything, I started making fun of him because, well, when you have comments like this, when you make tweets like this, you are now allowed to be made fun of, in my opinion. Because this is really, 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 really silly. Sorry. And in my opinion, it only takes away from him. Before this point, I actually thought that he, although I might have disagreed in certain ways, he kind of was making a good argument. Just from the perspective that you do need to be worried about the words that you say. They do have negative effects, right? A very generalistic point, and I'm generalizing it. He obviously made a little bit more of a nuanced one, which I actually agreed with. And I even criticized Yong on that given point. And have always criticized him. In fact, anytime his content gets mentioned with my channel, I typically say he's a reactionary. He does news. He article videos. I don't believe that's the same type of content that I want to do, or I think people, necessarily should offer a little bit more analysis personally, but that's my opinion, right? This isn't an opinion argument, or this isn't a fair argument to then just classify somebody's audience when they disagree with you. Which, by the way, that at this point, 15 minutes into the video, seems like they're being pretty fair to each other. Like, nobody's tried to mischaracterize each other. No one's tried to say you're lying. No one's called each other names or anything. Besides, I think Jason being a little bit flippant and Yong being a little bit leading, because he certainly was leading. I made that observation that he's trying to set up premises in a way which forces Jason to defend himself. But that's just what you do in a conversation or a discussion, period. I think that they've been fair mainly up until this point, unless this thing just goes completely wrong near the end of this, which, as far as I could tell from Yong's perspective, he was completely confused as to why this was such a problematic issue. He says, all I'm thinking long and hard about is how we had a conversation in which we both could share our perspectives. If that's somehow less value to you than some comments, I don't know what to tell you, right? So this, again, we can infer on Yong saying this, that this is him saying it because he's literally legitimately confused. He doesn't understand why all of a sudden Jason has painted the narrative to be like, they're unreasonable. They don't listen. Look at this. Anti-Semitic. Whereas from, Yong's perspective, he was pretty fair. He was willing to, first off, have a discussion, period, which is risky, and willing to listen to what this guy's perspective was, period. The horrible, toxic comments are far from ideal, nor do I support or share those sentiments. The reason why this is such a silly argument, guys, is that I've had people who are literally racist bigots post things on my channel before. I even had a guy one time call me a leprechaun. He legitimately thought he was being funny and edgy, and he was like, haha, you're a red-haired, leprechaun. And I remember reading that and I'm just thinking to myself, if I think that my audience only makes these kinds of posts or these kinds of comments, man, my perception would be far different with you or from you guys, right? But I know, just like most people know, that there's standard deviations, right? That we have the majority population, which is going to act relatively normal. And then we have maybe the really dumb people or the really smart people who kind of balance things in whatever kind of way. My audience typically is the older audience, which typically means they're a little bit more mature, right? Which certainly helps. I've heard stories from Lazy Peon, for example, who, by the way, has a general audience, a more so general audience, one that is actually smaller than Yong's. And he has told me, word for word, he said, I don't read the comments after I initially upload the video. And that's because YouTube comments are terrible, right? And I'm sure you guys have heard this many, many times from different content creators. It's because after a while, it starts to seem like, what's the point when you get these good comments, but they don't make you feel as bad or as emotional as the bad comments do? Psychologically, the bad shit affects us more. So it's very easy to just think that your audience is negative because you keep seeing negative and negative. But in Jason's case, his audience, or the audience that's perceiving him here, which is a general audience, once again, is perceiving him negatively. What this means is that if you think that everyone thinks that you're an asshole unfairly, not saying this of Jason, but just making the funny analogy, it probably means that you're an asshole, right? You guys have heard that statement before, right? If you feel like everybody's an asshole, you're probably the asshole in that case. I didn't see anything unfair from this. Yes, and then you have the really smart people who don't comment on. Actually, probably the majority of, probably sounds like I'm making a controversial statement. The majority of people who watched obviously don't like or comment. I mean, this is actually a pretty good rate right here. I'm gonna like this. But this is a pretty good rate right here, right? 11,000 or so out of 95,000. So about a 10% engagement percent. That's pretty good. But anyway, let me go back up here. Let's see what I didn't read the rest of what you guys were saying. Have you talked about Square Enix's re-interest in Final Fantasy XI, the upcoming Nexon partnered mobile spinoff, and the FanFest coming up in December? I've heard about the partnered mobile spinoff, and I've heard, I would say, precursory talks of the reignited interest in Final Fantasy XI. In fact, I've seen advertisements for the friend finder on my Facebook before. It's interesting. I don't know what to think of it necessarily. I think their numbers dropped slightly last time I checked, so maybe they're just trying to recoup that, or maybe they're just, hoping to get the strongest Final Fantasy XI performance that they can from this quarter, because it's a particularly important quarter for them because of the launch of their Final Fantasy XIV New Expansion. I'm not entirely sure, but I'll have to look more into that. Yeah, sorry if I seem too dismissive, Venus. You might have missed the earlier part of the discussion. I actually tried to start as I basically tried to start the discussion explaining both perspectives and explaining both problems at the very start, and then I proceeded to let them kind of go on with the video discussion. What I found, obviously, is that although the video seems to play out pretty fairly, it seems to quickly devolve into just complete, utter stupidity. This shouldn't happen. Like, I just don't get why he would do this. It's so strange. It makes me think it's an emotional reaction, because I don't get the logical reason for reacting in such a way, unless he just purposely wants to virtue signal, which is what this looks like. This looks like, hey everybody, look at me. I don't like people who hate Jewish people, and I don't like alt-right people. But Yong Yea, he better be careful, because I think he does. By the way, this is implied. This is implied. This is an implication. But it's unfair when people say that it's a stretch, right? Because we know what he means by think long and hard about. Like I said, it's like what a child gets told whenever they're put into timeout. Pretty sure the guy is a Nazi. I mean, he did disagree with Jason. There you go. He could have done the video, left it at that. I totally agree, Pinzero. In fact, I would even wager if he did that video and didn't have this really strange reaction, he actually would have come out better. And what I mean by that is that I personally had a higher view of him from first off being willing to do this, and second off, he seemed to, at least early on, be willing to not misrepresent and have a bad faith argument, which I respect. So I think that largely he would have came out positive on this, right? I think people would have understood a bit more of his perspective, even if it's maybe flawed or take what you will with where it comes from, right? But having that sort of reaction after the fact, it's just stupid, man. You shouldn't do that. It also puts Yong in a bad light too. It's a bit of a slander. You're implying somebody's aligned with people that he shouldn't necessarily be aligned with. Heard it here first. Nerd Slayer called Jason an a-hole. That kind of response warrants being called an asshole. Yes, definitely. Won't ever comment on YouTube. It might be contagious. Yeah, it'll spread to your feet. You'll have to amputate, and then it'll take over your brain as well. You'll wake up in the middle of the night and you're just like shit posting on YouTube. You're just like, fucking, I'm still playing the game. The game's still alive. I'm just kidding. Are there upcoming MMOs coming in the future I should look out for, except Pantheon? Limpos, yeah, he's got you covered. Those are probably the more popular ones. It's due to abhorrent lack of journalistic integrity in today's news media, both video games and elsewhere. Probably. I think the bigger problem, though, Venus, is that journalistic integrity, especially in the context of gaming or confines of gaming, isn't really fully explained. I hope that that's a video editorial I can do at some point, because at least maybe I can do my part. Obviously, I'm just one person, but I mean, well, I've got you guys. I'm not just one person. Jason is a far-left lunatic working for Kotaku. You can't get any worse in game journalism. That's about as big as a reach as the reach that he's making here, though, I would say. I don't know if you can tell that he's a far-left lunatic as much as you can just tell that he's somebody who maybe has a penchant for virtue signaling, just a little bit. YongYea can be seen as guilty by association, especially in Jason's circle. It will also worsen Young's chance for another interaction with the more traditional gaming journalist. I don't really think Young should care about that. Let's go big screen here. Let's go big face here. So, something that you guys will learn again as I explain the future of this channel pretty soon. One thing, he probably is a little bit, I wouldn't want to say he's politically obsessed, but he certainly is politically charged, right? But anyway, what I was going to say is that what I find that I hope I can make abundantly clear to people is that being on the side of the developer is very, very beneficial, right? People often will say, Kotaku sucks, but they won't explain why Kotaku is the way it is. That's problematic. It is the way it is, as I said, is because it's essentially, a symptom, right? Is it what's that word? It's not sympathetic, asympathetic, it's symptomatic, I think is the word, right? Where it means it's like a symptom of, right? It's a symptom of such an issue. You are benefited financially to work with publishers. Asymptomatic, thank you. You're financially incentivized to work with publishers, developers, whether it be sponsored videos, whether it be advertisements, whether it be referrals, right, to their actual game. People get incentivized to refer people. There's a bunch of different reasons why it's pretty good thing to be on the side of the developer, right? When the new change comes, you're the first person to test it. You get invited to closed beta, alpha testing. You get the first hands-on to a product. You get to drop a scoop, right? I mentioned this earlier. There's a lot of reasons why you should be team developer, right? Not a whole lot of reasons why you should be team individualistic. And hear me out. If you want to be more so individualistic as a content creator, and you want to just be open to criticizing whatever is out there, which is essentially how I feel. I feel like I just want to criticize whatever I think needs to be criticized, right? Whereas I'm not really thinking about a particular agenda. I'm just kind of covering whatever comes to me. From my perspective, why would a developer want to give me a sponsored video, or why would he want me to review his game if he already knows that I'm going to be critical or potentially could be very critical, right? He doesn't have a whole lot of reason to. Do developers have a good reason to hop on a Discord chat with me and tell me why their MMO failed? I'll let you guys answer this question in the comments, because people often ask why I don't talk to developers more in these videos, and I genuinely don't think they understand what that video would then entail. I've already done it before. I've already talked to the developers. I've already did the interview before. I've already had somebody, like he was in the Matrix, like sidestep all of my questions and, you know, matrix around certain things and stuff. Like, I've already had someone get on their dancing shoes and avoid all of my questions. And at the end, I'm just like, what value did I really get from this, like, type of engagement with this person? Not a whole lot. It's more so they just smoke screened, right? Now, to explain what I'm saying here, there's no reason for them to tell me, because they still work in gaming, majority of these developers. Why would they tell me something about their game failing that was their fault? That could hurt their chances at getting a job. That could hurt other people's chances at getting a job. That could hurt their stock, right? The value in the eyes of the board, in the eyes of the fan base, the audience, right? What do they benefit from actually being completely transparent and saying, you know what, this major feature that broke the game is my fault? It's like no, like, you can't always just trust a developer just because they know more than me or you and have more intimate knowledge, because they have more intimate knowledge, they have more financial incentive to not let you know, right? Why don't developers these days anymore release their population numbers in MMOs? Again, another rhetorical question, but I would like for you guys to actually answer it. So maybe not rhetorical, but seriously, why would they, right? What benefit do they have to essentially allowing somebody, what he's doing is an ad hominem, he's attacking people's character because he isn't beating their argument, right? Exactly. I'm going to take a quick restroom break, and then we'll try and wrap this up. Sorry, guys. Okay, I can actually finish my point. My hair looks terrible right now. Okay, so again, from my perspective, being the individualistic journalist, if anything, gives you far more issues, because now you're no longer on the side of the developer, and you're not necessarily completely in agreement with the audience either, right? And what I mean by that is that, for example, I'm not so quick to say that all publishers or developers are equal because they make a bad game, right? That's why I fundamentally don't like the name of that series that Clean Prince Gaming did that's similar to mine, which is called It Didn't Die, It Was Murdered, because it has a connotation that they somehow maliciously, like, murdered their game or something, right? But I've certainly had people who've disagreed with me, and I'm more than willing to disagree with people, because that's just normal, right? With journalism, it's dangerous to disagree too much, because if you can no longer get picked up by the big journalism, you know, I guess games journalists, right? Can't get picked up by those companies, by those outlets. It's like you basically don't have a choice but to kind of just grind your way up, right? It's pretty hard to make it as a gaming journalist. You have to basically make it on YouTube, right? Or make it on Twitch. Like, there's not a whole lot of avenues for you. And especially if you say that you don't want to take the developer friend route, right? Where you share brewskis with the developer buddies and they hand you the exclusives and you hand them a nice 10 on the back, or hit them with a 9.5 or an 8.5 like they used to do the Call of Duty series. That basically after a certain amount of time was just a copy game every year, right? How were these games continuing to get better reviews even though they were like basically criticizing them even more? Advertisement, exchanging of the dollars, right? Blah, 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 blah. That sort of thing. I brought this up to explain that in Jason's case, he's arguing from the perspective of being aligned with developers. Whereas Yong's arguing from the perspective, as far as I can tell, based on his content, of not being aligned with developers. So that has to be taken into consideration, even if Jason makes good points. You have to understand where it's coming from, right? And to end this podcast, first off, I want to thank you guys for stopping by. We've managed to have 40 viewers just about the entirety of this, so I want to thank you all for watching. And I know it's been a bit more commentary-like today than it typically is, but I think that's better. Not to mention, I'm working on so much other things. I simply don't have time. I didn't have time this week to create some big elaborate show idea for you guys. Instead, I'll leave you with this, that you're going to see a big push on this channel towards being as regimented and as loyal to our ethics as we possibly can. This is essentially me putting on the gloves of journalism officially, right? That's what's going to happen in the next month. I'll make a big announcement about it. And just to tease you guys a little bit what this means, can I tell you guys? I say that like somebody's keeping me from telling you, which the only person who's keeping me from telling you is myself. Okay, some of the things that I will tease is, first off, Death of a Game 2.0 is real. It's a thing, and it's going to happen. There's a lot of aspects that will make it a 2.0, but let's just say it's going to be more time, more opportunities, and more chances taken to try and make it more specific, right? For each game experience, kind of like we did with Telltale. Other things that we want to implement are skits. Yes. Yep, we're thinking about skits now. Don't worry. I know people are getting mad at Angry Joe recently with his skits because they're going for way too long. Like when a skit lasts for like 6 minutes and then the video starts, it is kind of like, all right, dude. Like, let's just get on with the video. They'll always be short. They'll be fun. But we're planning on having at least, a skit for every Death of a Game video. That's part of our 2.0 push. This is because there are specific parts of Death of a Game that have always been, but more so lately been, specifically engineered to be something that I could do light, on-camera work. And what I mean by that is that, remember in the very beginning of the video where I talk about what this video is going to be about? I'll say like, on this episode of Death of a Game, we will chronicle the blah, 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 right? That's a part that I can do live. I can shoot that. I can wear my detective outfit. People can recognize my face. They can put the words to the face. I'm no longer what my editor described as the God voice, which is like the concept in editing or in videography where you're like the voice behind. You can't see that person. They're just like talking to you and just like, it's like the voice of God or whatever else. Angry Joe does a good job of doing the skits and filming his criticism while he's on screen. So it helps create more brand recognition. It helps create more interaction and friendliness between him and his audience. And those are things that I all want to look to do. Also, at the very end segment of the Death of a Game series lately, we've been also doing 2 more segments that we've added. One is a clue segment, and one is a segment that reviews what we've talked about in the video. These are segments that would be skits, essentially, right? Potentially could be skits. Just throwing that out there. Blues Clues. Blues could do, you could too. Isn't that the song that he says sometimes? Let me see if there's anything else I can kind of leak. Oh, there's going to be a number of new features that are added to the channel only if a certain threshold is reached in funding. This is probably not new to you guys. Like most Kickstarters have this. They're called stretch goals. We will have these as well once we do our big announcement and our big announcement video, which is going to be shot and, you know, produced like fully. But we made the first we made the first tier, or I shouldn't say tier because Patreon has tiers and it has goals, and tiers are particularly a type of bracket of like how much money, $5 tier, $10 tier, whereas goals are obviously a monetary amount that must be reached in order for something to be done. We just got a letter. We just got a letter. Wait. We just got a letter. We just got a letter. I wonder who it's from. Ah, it's another bill that I owe. that's Blue's Clues in his like existential crisis. He's like, oh, fucking hell, it's another bill that I owe. The first goal is a very reachable amount of money. And that goal, I don't want to spoil too much, but one thing I'll say is it adds a completely new series that will be released every month. And it also adds more stream time for me. Like a Friday, I don't want to call it Friday Night Mafia, but it's more like Friday Mafia because it's night for EU, more like afternoon for the NA audience. That's like, and there's other things that I can't tell you guys, but that's like the first tier, right? It's pretty reachable, but it offers some really cool things. Then we have like other tiers, like tier 2, goal 2 is that is essentially the tier we call full-time channel, which obviously I work full-time here, but my editor only works on 2 videos a month, so he doesn't work full-time. So I'm actually going to, with that goal 2, going to be giving him the amount of money that I need to give him in order for him to work full-time. So at goal, you know, this is how the video is kind of going to go. It's going to explain this, but it's going to do it obviously in an informative and fun way. I think No Clip recently did a video about this, like a funding video. Was very effective at getting the kind of funds it needed, but I thought that it was a little bit simplistic in that it doesn't actually offer any like funny aspects to it. It's just a little bit too serious, but not too serious. They kept it lighthearted, but I guess it's just the content is basically only the advertisement. Anyway, so that's like the second goal. The second goal is like a full-time channel. That means that we can essentially put out 4 videos a month. That's a video every week. For us, that's a full-time job because our videos are typically longer. This also means that we have things that are in the works, for example, like a webcomic, possibly drawn and designed by our illustrator. Or even maybe some more skits that are actually drawn. Maybe even a Draw My Life that's illustrated in the typical NS fashion, right? Those are some ideas that we have and we're working on now. All of this will be announced. I'm just giving you guys a little bit of a teaser. The goal 3, oh man, that one we've dubbed live production. So again, first goal is called it's called I don't know why I said 1,000. New is good. New is good. That's the name of the first goal. The second goal is full-time channel. The third goal is live production. And that's basically all I'm going to say about that goal. That one should be self-explanatory. That means documentaries, live event work, live mafia. But I'm not going to explain that. Right? And then there's the last goal, which is called, in my opinion, affectionately called Studio Days, which, as the name also implies, it means that we're looking at potentially, obviously, getting a studio for both the podcast, skits, and a regular series that'll come out weekly. So that's all I'm going to say in that regard. I already said way too much. But I like to share with you guys what's coming up next, because I know people ask about it a lot. The last thing that I'll tell you guys is the Rift video should be coming out by the end of this month. And that'll be a good one, surely. And then following that, we will have PAX Unplugged in Philly at the end of this month, November 30th to the 2nd of next month. I will be at that event, so if you find yourself in Philly and you're at that event, it's a tabletop event, I'll be there. I'll also be recording and shooting footage there, and basically recording our video for the announcement video that we keep talking about. So yeah, look forward to the Rift video, look forward to that big announcement video coming out next month, likely. A lot of exciting things, and like I wish I could tell y'all more, but we're trying to do it in a fun, informative way, because like somebody said, it's hard to ask people for money. I mean, it's hard in any capacity. Even if you're providing them a service, it's still hard to ask people for money. But ultimately, the reason why this has been a big thing that I've been working on lately is I've realized that YouTube as a platform isn't really the best platform for somebody who wants to do the sort of work that I want to do. And what I mean by that is that ultimately YouTube is a popularity contest. It means that if YouTube is my primary income driver, essentially what that means is that I have to not only try and make the most popular videos that I can possibly make, it means that I also am incentivized to make sponsored videos, for example, right? Because if YouTube is my primary source of content, it means that I want to utilize the best thing that I can use, which is my audience. It means that that's more likely, right? More sponsored content is more likely when YouTube is a bigger income driver. But obviously, as I said, having a journalist that relies on popularity in the eyes of YouTube and the general audience, I'm sure you guys can see what's kind of problematic about that, because people might ask me, why don't you do an Asheron's Call video? Well, I would love to do an Asheron's Call video. Why don't you do a video about the differences between these different markets and how they work? Well, I would love to do that. But in order for me to work on a project like a documentary, for example, such as that expose that I've mentioned about EA before that I want to do, or the what is an MMORPG documentary, those take months and months and thousands of dollars to work, right? Just from the perspective of like, let's not even throw money into the situation. Let's say I have a finite amount of time that I work on videos a month. It takes me 2 weeks to make 2 Death of a Game videos, right? It means that if one of those Death of a Game videos aren't particularly successful, I'm in a bit of a bind now, right? It basically guarantees that the next video I make has to be a popular one. So I hope I'm making sense, but it makes more sense for me to be funded by the audience and not the general population or YouTube, right? Because ultimately, the audience, you guys, can manage how much money you give me, know exactly why you're giving me money, because we'll explain, obviously, all of the different roles and tiers and goals. But I also will make that video very explicitly explain to you guys what my stance is and what we're looking to do in the future. The standard that we will hold ourselves to, and all of the different content promises that we're making, obviously. So yeah, when I think about it, it's about taking my I don't want to call YouTube my boss, because they're certainly not my boss, but they definitely pay me. Put it this way. It's putting the situation to where the people who are giving me the money are actually people who are watching, consuming, and interacting with my content. Whereas on YouTube, I might have a video that has 1 million views or 100,000 views, but how many of those engagements I actually am going to get in terms of like a monetizable amount of money, right? It's more finite. And that's why people make clickbait videos. That's why people make these article response videos, right? Because all of these things positively reflect in the YouTube algorithm. Changing that to Patreon, though, I think will be very, very important for the channel and will essentially open us up to make anything, right? Because we no longer have to make only what everybody will watch, right? Not all of the eggs in the popularity basket. Our eggs are put it this way. The eggs, I don't know why I am sticking to the eggs analogy, but the eggs in this case, yes, they're no longer completely reliant on popularity. And the eggs, so to say, the basket is in the hands of the people who are actually consuming my content on a daily basis, right? They're the person that should inform what my content is. Wouldn't you guys agree? The guys who actually watch my content and are sub to me and are active in my channel, they should inform what kind of content I make. But they don't. Not really. You see? Because when popularity is what makes you money, at the end of the day, my bosses, so to say, is the YouTube algorithm. It's not my audience. So we're looking to change that. But I've spoken way too long today. I've ranted way too long today. I think it's a good time as any for me to stop here. And I obviously, again, I want to thank everybody for watching. Thank you for stopping by. And thank you, Card, for sticking by to make sure if anybody had any questions or wanted to ask me anything personally. I won't open the rest of this chat up now to that because it's probably a little bit too late for that. But I'll get you guys next time. And for the record, out there to Rafnar, Mr. Rafnar, he wanted me to ask something about. Let me read up and find it. He wanted to talk about a dynamic weather system and how dynamic weather could affect MMOs in some sort of way. And I'll table that discussion for another time, but maybe you guys can just keep that one in mind. I feel like we got a little bit too distracted this week to talk about MMOs more so, but we'll talk about that one more so next week. And of course, just so you guys remember, if you ever have any questions, comments, want to ask me anything, or respond to anything that I've done in the past, as I always tell you guys, I'm open. You can message me, you can talk to me on Discord, and of course, if you want to, you can talk to us on the podcast live. So yeah. Anyway, thank you guys. I hope you have a good rest of your Monday. It's the 19th of November. It's freaking cold as hell where I live right now. So good luck to those EU people who are going to sleep right now or about to go to sleep. And good luck to the American audience who is still finishing the rest of their day. I hope you guys have a good day, and a good weekend. As you can tell, my brain is already starting to malfunction on me. But yeah, I hope you guys have a good weekend. I will see you guys. When will I see you guys? That's right, next Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern. See you guys later.